There has always been chaos and opposition between good and evil in the world, and it all started with the organization's Shadow of Eternal Rest. Serena Ravala was waiting for class to begin and to be assigned to the 5th Training Center to prepare her strength and capabilities. Among the other participants, she was the most upset because she really wanted to go to the 1st center specializing in fencing. Serena understood that the 5th center specializing in survival techniques training was not particularly popular due to the severity of the training. This was mainly due to the instructor of the 5th Training Center, Ice Demon, because he was the strictest in the entire organization. After introductions, the Ice Demon asked rookie number 23 to step forward and make an attack on him. Watching the confrontation, Serena thought that now they would see the skills of the Ice Demon teacher for the first time. She understood that the teacher treated them with contempt, but also student number 23 had superficial swordsmanship skills. At some point in her sparring with her teacher, the 23rd novice dropped her weapon and shrieked in surprise. The Ice Demon turned to the students and asked them to sort out and name all the mistakes that number 23 had made during the confrontation. Serena Ravala raised her hand and said that the rookie swung her sword and immediately gave up after failing. She supplemented her answer by saying that one should not bear one's sword unless one intends to go all the way, and one should not give up while one has vitality. The Ice Demon teacher said that the answer wasn't bad but not true enough and immediately started attacking Serena. Blocking the teacher's punch, Serena realized that he was completely copying and demonstrating the movements of student number 23. After trapping Serena during fencing, the teacher asked her to explain technical errors in movement, but Serena couldn't understand. The teacher explained that the Shadow Strike was a powerful swordsmanship technique they had learned, but that it could not be used to defend oneself, only to attack. Serena realized that it was only a punch and realized that the mistake was in their technique that they had learned during their fencing training. The teacher added that they should learn that if they do not have the utmost confidence in their abilities, they should not reveal themselves to the enemy. It was at this moment that Serena clearly appreciated and realized the skills and abilities of the 5th Training Center teacher. Next, the teacher ordered everyone to run 20 laps and perform shadow punches a total of 18 times. He added that each type of exercise should be performed at least 100 times and do not even dream of resting. The Ice Demon reported that number 7 and 23 should perform a run of 10 laps and 50 reps each. All of the students began their exercises by running large circles around the sports center, where they were practicing. Serena realized that it was too difficult for her first training session, so she waited for the discontent among the students to begin. She turned to look at the teacher, but he didn't interfere with the process at all, and watched everyone doing the exercises with complete calmness. Serena was very puzzled, because she had managed to wound her teacher in the shoulder area, but he showed no sign of pain at all. She realized that she had to make every effort to revive the Raval family and learn the most effective martial arts techniques. The Ice Demon only thought about the terrible pain in his shoulder and didn't understand how number 7 was even able to strike him. He thought about the fact that the girl was more like a hero but didn't understand why a specialist hero would become a spy in their organization. As he watched her, he didn't understand why she was looking at him and smiling, because it was already very hard for him to keep the pain in his shoulder and stay calm. Ice Demon Kane. Ronald worked as a junior instructor in an organization to get a chance to earn a living. He was currently a 3rd grade villain and made decisions to ignore disciple number 7 to avoid getting more trouble. Meanwhile, the students continued to complete the task that their Ice Demon teacher had given them, and tried their best to complete it to the end. Serena tried hard, but she had no strength at all. But she had no desire to give up, so she persisted with her sword lunges. Kane Ronald watched her and wondered when all the students would finally finish and leave so he could go to the health center for help. The only thing he wished for was to get medical attention and go home to finally eat and go to bed. Serena looked at the instructor and realized she had to finish the exercises to the end no matter what it cost her. Suddenly, Serena felt sick. She dropped her sword from her hands because her head spun and she fell unconscious. All the students observed her and her well-being, and reported to the teacher that number 7 was unwell and needed help. Kane Ronald informed all the students that classes were over for the day and shouldered Serena and walked towards the center. When he brought us to his chambers, he was very upset that he had spent so much energy on a girl who was also very heavy. He decided to examine the girl's body to check his hunch and make sure that the girl belonged to the heroes and infiltrated the center for the purpose of espionage. After making the bandage, Kane Ronald decided for starters to move the weapon away from student number 7 so she wouldn't be able to attack him after she regained consciousness. Examining Serena's clothes and shoes, Kane had a lot of questions because she had both throwing stars and hidden pockets. As he continued to examine the body of Serena, who had not yet regained consciousness, he increasingly confirmed his hunch that she might have been a spy. Examining Serena's fingers, he noticed her ring, which bore the emblem of the famous Ravale family of swordsmen. Then Kane realized that since number 7 was his intern at the moment, he would have to take responsibility for her actions. He thought about how he could do the right thing because he realized that such heroes see crises as a stepping stone to gain power. Meanwhile, Serena was unconscious and remembered her father who was very ill and continued to teach her fencing. She realized that her Reveille clan had founded the stone sword style and was one of those greatest among swordsman families. Serena didn't want her father's efforts to revitalize the family to go to waste, and as his successor sought different solutions to the problem. At some point she realized that the only solution might be to master all 3 types of fencing and combine them into a single style. However, her thoughts were interrupted by her father, who came back after practice, and she was very happy to see him because she loved him too much. They hugged, but her father told her the dreaded thing that now the future of the Reveille family depended only on her and her actions. When Serena regained consciousness, she realized it was just a bad dream and tried to figure out where she was at the training. The 5th instructor called her out as a girl of the Reveille clan and displayed her ring with the clan emblem in his hand. Cain was surprised that the Reveille family had fallen, and a descendant who was a master swordsman dared to appear in the dark organization of the Shadow of Eternal Sleep. Serena realized that she had been exposed but tried to keep her cool and not give in to provocation from the 5th squad instructor. At some point she realized that she urgently needed to run away, so she decided to launch the instructor's throwing star, but he kept talking. Cain said he understood why she came to the organization and demonstrated her proficiency in all 3 styles of swordsmanship. Serena was very surprised to see the battle flame style, and Cain Ronald realized that her gaze was not rusty like the rest of the Reveille family. In order to put the wildness to sleep, Cain informed that he himself was from a forgotten lineage of swordsmen, and most likely they were destined to meet. Serena was very surprised that the 5th training squad teacher was so honest with her, and decided to confide in him. She clarified if he wished to put the experiment of fusing the 3 strongest styles of fencing on her specifically. Cain confirmed Serena's speculation, but warned that her own right to life would most likely be on the line. Therefore, he suggested that she jointly participate in refining the merge style, so that she could restore her Reveille clan. Serena was a little surprised by this event and decided to clarify if the Ice Demon was willing to accept her, secretly as his personal apprentice. Cain confirmed that he was willing to accept her as a secret apprentice, but to himself he was very happy that he could take the girl's life by exhausting her with training. For starters, he asked Serena to put on and always wear leg weights so that her calf muscles are constantly exercised and become stronger. Next, Cain gave her a tincture of velvet tree root to ease the effects of exercise and a band-aid to treat blisters. 10 days later, Serena, who had been training at 100%, realized that she was getting sick and passed out again. The other students immediately began giving number 7 medical attention, while Cain looked at her indifferently and hoped she'd gone to eternal rest. However, after both 20 and 30 days of hard training, Serena didn't want to give up and persevered. Cain was horrified by this and did not understand what was wrong with this girl, because every day she did not lose her strength, but on the contrary became stronger. Serena watched the teacher and didn't understand what he was so puzzled about, so she decided to ask what he was thinking so hard about. After a bit of thought, Cain informed her that she had already mastered the entire base, and now they could move on to the stage of doing the actual training. As Serena left, Cain thought about how a girl like that could last 30 days with so much physical activity. Cain decided to have a coffee and think of a new plan to make sure Serena could definitely use up all her energy and not interfere with his activities anymore. At some point he heard footsteps approaching and thought it was the return of number 7, who had probably just forgotten something. However, another coach entered his room who apologized for the intrusion and began to smile evasively, realizing that Cain was expecting someone else. Realizing that there might be uncomfortable questions about his relationship with number 7, Cain said he was just giving her advice. However, the other instructor assumed that Cain liked the trainee, and Cain spit out his coffee on him out of surprise. Another instructor said he was just kidding and had to go to class, then stole one of the student forms. I was very pleased with myself, because now I could better familiarize myself with the content of the questionnaires and the training plan. The next morning, Serena arrived for her individual training session, where she listened intently to her Ice Demon teacher. Demonstrating his skills, he explained to her that using fusion techniques increased the risk to one's own health, so one must be careful. Cain explained that each technique has its undeniable advantages, and to maximize results you should take advantage of them. Serena was a little intimidated by this demonstration of the teacher's skills, but realized that she had to learn all the lessons in the shortest amount of time possible. Cain said that he has now demonstrated fireworks of red sparks, and this technique can send an opponent to eternal rest with a single blow. He explained that if you added this style to the stone sword technique, you could get a strike that would destroy everything in its path. Serena decided to clarify if such a powerful style was really even possible in reality. Cain confirmed that after hard training, anything is possible, and Serena said that she will definitely succeed because she has a goal. The teacher looked at her carefully and informed her that there was no going back now, and that she had to start training here and now. After a year of training, the 5th unit instructor informed her that all those training was over, and now she had to do everything on her own. Serena didn't understand what Kane meant and decided to clarify what was the right thing for her to do next, and he informed her that she needed to develop her mind. She apologized and asked to be trained in everything else, then Kane said he was willing to train her in physics, math, and other sciences. Over the course of about 10 days, Serena began to learn different subjects under the guidance of the 5th instructor and was a very attentive student. She noticed that the amount of knowledge the teacher had was far greater than any scientist, and at one point the teacher even fell asleep during class. After covering him, Serena realized that the instructor should be given time to rest, so she decided to leave quietly. However, as soon as she came out, she was stopped by the 3rd squad instructor, who said that the 4th instructor had already reported everything to him. He felt it was inappropriate for such a close relationship between instructor and student, and asked number 7 to explain what this was about. Serena didn't understand the point of the question and replied that their relationship was understandable because she was a student at the 5th training center. The 3rd instructor bent over her and said that he had known from the beginning that she was a Ravelet spy, and asked her to demonstrate her technique. Serena replied that she couldn't do that, and the 3rd instructor said that the trainee had no right to argue with the instructor. Seeing that she was being attacked, Serena had no choice but to confront the instructor of the 3rd training center. At some point, however, she realized she had overdone it and seriously injured a 3rd instructor. Realizing that at any moment other instructors might arrive, Serena decided to go on the run, so she jumped out the window and ran into the woods. After a few minutes, she realized that a pursuit had begun behind her from instructor number 1 and instructor number 2 of the training center. To ensure her own protection, Serena realized that she would have to bare her sword and confront the instructors. Student number 23 entered the office and woke up the 5th instructor to report what had happened while he was dozing. The student reported that number 7 wounded the instructor of the 3rd training center, then fled towards the woods. Kane was horrified, especially after learning that the 3rd instructor was being investigated for espionage charges. He realized that if the other instructors found out about number 7's true mission, he too could get caught in the hot seat as an accomplice. The 23rd student reported that the 1st and 2nd instructors were already in pursuit of number 7, while the others were busy making a report. Kane realized that during the investigation he could be caught too, so he decided to run away as soon as possible. To avoid arousing suspicion, he ordered number 23 to gather the trainees and follow them to headquarters with the 4th instructor. Then he added that he himself planned to find number 7 in order to come with her to the headquarters for investigation. The 23rd student tried to explain that instructor number 1 had talked about making sure Kane attended the gathering as well, but Kane didn't listen to her because he realized that he should follow the trail of number 7 to keep himself safe. As he passed through the northern part of the forest, he noticed the lifeless bodies of the other instructors and realized that the family number had taken everyone's life. Walking further into the forest, he managed to find Serena, who was soiled and trying to catch her breath after the battle. Serena looked at the teacher and said she was sure he was coming too, so she bared her sword. Kane didn't understand why she was so attuned to him. After all, he had personally trained her and helped her with all of her training. Realizing that with his own hands made student number 7 very strong, tried his best to concentrate so as not to miss a hit. However, when she damaged the teacher, she did not expect that behind her back would be the instructor of the 2nd center whom the teacher had taken the life of. Experiencing the horrible pain in his shoulder area, Kane tried to hold on and not show his weakness, saying that Serena was still stupid as well. Serena was very ashamed of her actions, but Kane pulled out his bag, which contained a small pouch. He said there were various things stored inside that she could use at first, including a map of the area and medicine. Taking the bag of useful items, Serena lowered her head and was surprised that she wanted to take the teacher's life, but he was still helping her. Kane asked her not to get too lost in her thoughts and added that at the moment she was just bait for him to have time. Pensive, Serena wondered if this small gesture as bait would be enough to repay the teacher for his kindness. Making a bandage on his shoulder, Kane was surprised by student number 7's question and asked what she meant by such statements. Looking at Serena, he handed her a few gold coins and told her that nothing more would be required of her. After receiving the coins, Kane asked Serena to continue on her way, because he realized that they had no more time because they were wanted. Serena thanked Kane's teacher and wished he had a real successor someday. Teacher Kane smirked and thought that he would never again meet such a responsible and capable student. When Kane was on his way back, there were several members of the Shadow of Eternal Rest organization, led by the instructor of the 1st center. He realized that he had no other way, and the instructor of the 1st center handed him the sword, saying that this way they would be on equal footing. Taking the sword, Kane bowed and said he would appreciate the gesture, but all he could think about was the savage pain in his shoulder. Seeing that the 5th instructor was traumatized, the 1st instructor began to laugh and regretted not being present for their battle with the 2nd instructor. Kane replied that he too was sorry she was absent during their battle, and asked her to focus on the battle ahead. The confrontation between the 1st and 5th training center instructors was quite long and dangerous. The instructor of the 5th Training Center used the shadow shift swordsmanship technique that he had learned on his own. The instructor of the 1st Training Center used the fencing technique Illusion of Battle, which was developed by her personally. Everyone understood that each of the 3 types of basic styles of fencing art had its own specific features and advantages. Serena knew that the stone sword style was not amenable to any defense from the opponent. At the same time, the shadow strike swordsmanship technique had no equal among the other styles in gaining a swift victory. But the technique of the swordsmanship Flame of Battle had the property of causing damage with a retaliatory strike after blocking the opponent's attack. At the same time, each style had its own weaknesses and advantages compared to the opposite style of fencing. Despite the fact that Kane was physically stronger and masterful in his fencing style, the instructor of the 1st Center was much more cunning. After delivering the last crushing blow, the instructor of the 1st Center asked Kane not to worry because opponent at number 7 would be found after him. After saying these words, the instructor of the 1st Center pushed the instructor of the 5th Training Center off the cliff. Convinced of her victory, the instructor of the 1st Center ordered the others to search for student number 7. Serena realized that they would be looking for her, so she moved with the utmost caution, but after a while she was discovered. Having already taken the life of her 30th pursuer, she felt increasingly grateful to Kane for teaching her survival skills in the chase. Cleaning her blade, Serena reflected on the fact that her teacher had some really interesting skills and knowledge in different areas. After a while, she found herself surrounded by the elite swordsmen of the Shadow of Eternal Rest organization, led by the 1st instructor. The instructor at this 1st Training Center offered Serena a dignified surrender in exchange for a guarantee of life preservation. Serena decided to clarify whether her company would Assurance encounter a dungeon in which she would consequently be locked up forever. The instructor of the 1st Training Center sighed and said that she wasn't surprised that the traitor's successor would be so active in resistance. Realizing that the instructor of the 5th Training Center had been robbed of his life, Serena was a little scared. The 1st instructor reported that once they got the required skills from Kane, the need for him was gone. Serena realized that the teacher had lost his life after demonstrating his swordsmanship to her. The 1st instructor reported that all was fair in their battle, and had it not been for the shoulder injury, of course she would not have been able to prevail. Serena was horrified, because she realized that she was the reason the 5th Training Center instructor had a shoulder wound. The instructor of the 1st Training Center asked number 7 to prepare for her own taking of life and began to bare her blade. However, Serena was furious that through her own fault she had once again lost someone who helped her, took the lives of all her pursuers. Meanwhile, Kane regained consciousness after falling from a great height, but he was very dizzy and sore all over his body. Searching through his bag for the certain medications, he was very pleased that everything had gone exactly as he had planned. He was even a little proud of himself that he had put on a parachute under his cloak in advance, which had saved him from losing his life during the fall from the cliff. Having given himself first aid, he realized that he had managed to save himself, and now all that was left was to survive. Kane realized that now he wouldn't have a steady income, so he planned to earn again as a third-rate villain. Meanwhile, Serena had reached the very cliff from which the 1st instructor had said the 5th instructor had been thrown. Turning her blade to the sky, she swore that she would repay her teacher for his merit by making sure she survived in this world. Serena realized that this was a vow that was going to go around the world dedicated to her first and last mentor. In the meantime, she managed to reach the cabin, and after tidying herself up, she decided to grab a bite to eat to build up her strength. The hut worker was very surprised that a lady belonging to the imperial court preferred a rather strange dish for a meal. Serena explained that since childhood she has favoured rather peculiar dishes in order to develop an immunity to certain types of poison. The employee decided to show his curiosity and asked why such a noble person was in such a strange place. Serena replied that she had wanted to practice in the southern part of the continent for a long time, so she asked for a jungle guide. The hut worker replied that finding a guide is easy enough because the locals are not afraid to go into the rainforest. Making sure no one was overhearing them, he leaned over to Serena and informed her that the only thing everyone was afraid of was Shahat. Unbuttoning his shirt, he showed Serena his large scar and said that he had miraculously managed to escape Shahat's ghost. Serena decided to look carefully because she realized that such a wound could only be from a sword when using swordsmanship. After a bit of thought, she realized that this level of swordsmanship matched the level of training of the instructor of the 1st center. Serena hesitated because she realized that the 1st instructor could have been around then and she should be even more careful and attentive. Buttoning his shirt, the worker asked the mistress to be careful in the rainforest because that was where the ghost of Shahat resided. Serena thanked him for his advice and went to her bed to regain her strength, but before she slept she kept thinking about Shahat's ghost. She thought it was fiction, but she thought that if ghosts existed, she might meet someone she cared about again. In her dream, she saw Servilia and asked her what made her go from being a famous hero to being the head of an entire guild of bandits. Servilia replied that all life as a hero was horrible and one could only expect devastation and misery at the end. Serena didn't understand why Servilia had become so evil and what exactly made her change her choices and stop being a hero. But Servilia didn't listen to her and summoned the icy shards of Averio that she wished to direct towards Serena to show her her suffering and pain. Waking up and finding the snake on her bed, Serena thought she was getting used to the nightmares that came to her every night. Serena understood that it had been 3 years since the elimination of the Shadows of Eternal Rest organization, and she was constantly trying to keep her family's name safe. Her thoughts were interrupted by a young boy, Raja, who informed her that he was an experienced jungle and rainforest guide. Serena was very surprised because her guide was very young, and she realized that traveling into the jungle might be too dangerous. Raja said that he had worked many times before as a jungle escort for guests arriving in their village, but offered to replace the guide. Hearing that the second guide had gone camping not too long ago and wasn't due back anytime soon, Serena realized she didn't have time to put things off. So she was forced to accept the services of Raja's guide, realizing that she had absolutely no other choice now. Meanwhile, Kane received a letter from the evil organization and was very surprised by its contents. He realized that in order to complete the task he had been given, he would first have to find a guide through the rainforest. At that moment, he was passed by Raja, who said he was a guide and could escort him to the southern part of the rainforest. He asked the strangers to go to the vacant lot because he reported that it was already rented and would be moving out soon. At last, Raja said that there were only 2 guides in the whole village and one of them had already gone into the jungle, so he advised them to hurry. Kane realized that most likely he just didn't have any options left and would have to pay the full amount for the guide's services. Suddenly, he felt a weight on his head and realized with horror that he had been bitten by a poisonous snake. After taking the antidote, Kane was in a state of rage that someone had thrown a white snake from the cabin window right on his head. Suddenly, a villager came up to him and seeing that the gentleman was not feeling well, thought that he was just hungry, so he offered him something to eat. Kane was furious that the resident was offering him a white snake kebab and completely ruined it. When the villager saw the sword, he was very frightened and did not understand what he had done wrong and what he had done wrong. Kane could barely contain all his anger, realizing that the guy had apparently just decided to mess with him. He reported that feeding poisonous snacks to travelers is very unkind because they may not have an antidote. Kane was furious and a negative salgi emanated from him because he didn't understand how this village even welcomed visitors. The resident, sensing this, threw himself at Kane's feet and begged him to forgive him, for it was only a national dish and he did not mean to frighten the guest at all. Kane reported that there was a price to pay for any mistakes, so he checked with the resident to see if he knew the way to the extreme southern part of the village. When he received a favourable answer, Kane was overjoyed and said that from this day forward he would appoint the villager as his guide. The resident was very frightened and said he was new to this because he had not been able to go into the rainforest very often. But Kane was unwilling to listen to his excuses, realising that he had managed to save money and find a free guide to the next point. However, after travelling a little way under the guidance of a villager, they found themselves waist-deep in a veritable swamp. Kane was horrified that his guide had led him into the swamp, and the resident tried to justify that he had originally warned that he had little experience. Realizing the hopelessness of the situation, Kane got a rope and used a lasso to hook it to a tree to get a chance to get out. His guide was very surprised at such gestures and said he had never seen such a device in the form of a rope like a belt before. However, the guide's accidents and missteps did not end there, and the next time he found a beehive, he received multiple stings from bees. After getting the antidote from Kane, the guide accidentally dropped his backpack, which contained all his food and water supplies, into the water. Realizing once again the hopelessness of the situation, Kane kindly treated the guide to his supply of bits of dried meat. After eating the food, the guide was very glad and grateful to Kane for his kindness, for otherwise he would have starved to death. Meanwhile, Raja guided Serena through the rainforest and warned her of the dangers, but Serena herself had good training. Seeing Raj's surprise, Serena explained that it was possible to walk in the swamp if you moved your feet quickly and didn't let them get bogged down inside. Raja saw that Serena was close to the beehive and asked her to be very careful because he had a small supply of antidote with him. However, to his surprise, upon hitting the hive with her head, Serena easily disarmed all the insects with her sword. On their way, there were many trials in the form of vipers, jaguars, and swamp monsters, but Serena defeated them quickly and easily enough. Raja was very surprised at such skills of his wanderer, so at one point asked her if she was human at all. Serena explained to him that it was all thanks to the constant and hard training she had done every day for several years. After a while, Raja said that they had arrived at the second village where they could rest for a while, eat some food and regain their strength. During the meal, Raja said that all the villagers were very busy now because they were preparing for a competition between the villages. He added that there was soon to be a great competition between the 5 villages, so everyone was trying to do everything much faster. After finishing the meal, Raja told Serena that she could also participate in the competition because there were no special requirements. Tasting the apple, Serena refused because she realized she had only one goal in mind, which was to revive her Avail family. Continuing on his way, Raja was very surprised that the entrance to the third village was badly blocked and looked ruined. Hearing the sounds of a confrontation, Serena asked Raj to stay put so she could check things out alone. Entering the territory of the third village, Serena was horrified because all around her were only hundreds of lifeless bodies with their hearts taken away. Looking around carefully, she saw the man who had done all this and realized that he was the ghost of Shahat that everyone feared so much. Enraged, she immediately started attacking him, but the opponent was agile enough and blocked her attack. Serena realized she had to protect the villagers, so she introduced herself and informed them that today the enemy would pay for their sins. However, her opponent only smiled evilly and immediately started attacking her with his long gun. Serena put a lot of effort to block his attacks, but still she was wounded in the leg, and with pain she continued her attacks. After blocking only her opponent's first attack, she realized that her opponent was very strong, and it would not be easy for her to fight him. Serena realized that her opponent was one of those creatures who were not afraid of anything, not even the loss of life. To strengthen her attacks, she decided to use the swordsmanship style of the 5th Training Center's teacher called Flames of Battle. Her opponent tried to confidently block the attacks, but at some point his blade was broken and he was baffled by this coincidence. While her opponent was confused, Serena decided to take her chance and launched a counterattack on him. She managed to take her arm away from her opponent, and he began to rapidly abandon his position in fear and terrible pain, hoping to simply escape. Serena immediately chased after him, however, saw that he had once again taken the heart out of one of the lifeless bodies and began to feed on it. Serena was horrified by this behavior, and screamed that he was just a savage who was completely unaware of anything. However, to her surprise, after a second, her opponent's arm, which she herself had personally taken from him, began to regenerate after such a ritual. Seeing that her opponent had fully recovered, Serena was completely unaware of what was happening and realized that the person in front of her was not human. At that moment, Raja reached Serena and decided to ask her how she was doing, but when he saw what was happening, he realized he should run away. However, Shahata grabbed Raju and pointed towards another village, after which he immediately ran away and hid in the rainforest. Serena didn't know what to do since Raj had all her things and food, but decided to follow them, realizing that she had no other choice. Meanwhile, Cain and his escort had reached the third village and were greatly shocked by so many lifeless bodies. Cain realized that experienced villains should be well versed in the tracks left by their kind, so he decided to explore the area. After looking around, he realized that all the inhabitants were killed by the same person who was involved in the battle and ran away. Cain didn't understand why the villain was biting his own kind, for he found human teeth marks on all the bodies. His musings were interrupted by a woman's voice that wondered if they had arrived from the organization. The girl said her name was Aisha, and she had come from the last village to accompany the travelers. Following Aisha, Cain realized that she was much better at navigating the rainforest and jungle. In every village they passed through, they were welcomed and treated to a variety of foods. Cain was uncomfortable with Aisha, but he put it down to the pungent smell of fish coming from her. His guide wished to return home because Cain no longer needed an escort, but he forbade him to even think about it. Aisha turned to them, smiled sweetly, and informed them that they had already successfully arrived at the last village. As they approached one of the huts, Aisha informed Mr. Durkar that the guests had arrived and asked them to go inside. Dirha welcomed his dear guests who were honoured to meet the head of the village. Cain reported that the organisation is interested in having Mr. Dirha agree to become a member of their organisation. Durkar said he was willing to consider his proposal, but wanted to say something first. Cain didn't understand what he was talking about, so he decided to listen to the head of the last village located in the rainforest. Dirha reported that a certain beast had recently gone on a major rampage in their territories, and he couldn't leave the guards without support. Cain realised that most likely Durkar was talking about the incident they had seen on the way to the third village. Durkar said that Cain must find the beast and take its life, and warned that he had poor eyesight so he might get them mixed up. Cain said he could demonstrate his skills right now so that the village head could further distinguish him from the beast. Durkar said that there was no need for that because tomorrow they would go hunting together and show each other everything there. After the conversation, Cain made the decision to flee because he didn't want to get involved in all of this, and realised that the negotiations had gone awry. At one point his guide screamed in terror because he realised that someone was chasing them and trying to attack them. Cain was startled and decided to look around carefully, however the attacker was already standing right in front of him. Aisha, continuing to smile sweetly, informed that she was surprised they didn't even stay for the banquet and tried to leave their village so quickly. Aisha's ally looked closely at Cain and realised that something seemed very familiar to her about him. At some point she realised that she had seen him in the Devil's Soul organisation and was very unfriendly towards him. Kane didn't understand what she was talking about and was very upset that he had to confront not only the beast but her as well. To enhance his chances of winning this confrontation, Kane decided to use throwing stars. However, his opponents easily enough repelled this kind of attack by applying their own skills and abilities. His guide was very much frightened and tried to leave the confrontation zone as soon as possible to avoid getting damaged. At one point, he managed to wound Aisha's ally, and he thought that by doing so he was one step closer to victory. However, Aisha seized the moment and used a chain-linked sickle to grab Kane's neck. She was very glad to be out of her sight for a while, so she asked him if his whole life had flashed before his eyes. In the ensuing attack, Kane used a pouch of his supplies and everything around him was engulfed in an acrid fog of red. Upon reaching his partner, he decided to use demonic magic and ordered Balshak to hide them from the gaze of their opponents. Aisha and her ally were horrified that the travellers had managed to escape their gaze, so they decided to return to the village to reinforce the search party. After reaching a safe place, Kane and his guide tried to catch their breath to figure out what to do next and what path to take. At one point, the guide decided to exercise his curiosity and wonder why those people recognized him and what demon souls they were talking about. Kane had no desire to go into details and said that they could both lose their lives, so they should be thinking about other things right now. He said that they should continue on their way and leave the area as quickly as possible before they were discovered. They noticed that more than 100 villagers were ready to go on a search to catch the intruders. Observing the villagers from his cover zone, Kane decided to throw an insect nest at them to distract their attention. The inhabitants of the outermost village, upon discovering a nest of insects under their feet, began to panic, realizing that they were very dangerous. Kane, along with his escort, decided to take a chance and sneak onward to make their escape undetected. Among the villagers was Shahata, who said that saving the tree after the insect attack was no longer possible and they should postpone it. Aisha could smell some wonderful scent in the air and realized that she was very tired and only wanted at least some sleep. Her ally was furious and said that they had missed the man from Demon Souls and now they should only think about that and not the dream. Her only desire was to find that man as soon as possible to avenge him for everything and punish him for his evil deeds. Kane watched the inhabitants and realized they weren't going to give up, so he threw a lit torch in their direction. Meanwhile, Serena was also running away from the villagers, trying to explain to them that she was not the enemy and instead wanted to help them. In a few days of observation, she realized that villages are used as farms, and from each one, material for the beast is selected. She noticed that the people who'd been selected for the beast no longer had the right to simply free themselves or escape. The only thing Serena didn't understand was why humans chose to obey the beast and fulfill its demands. She knew she had gone too far and had no right to give up because Kane, the 5th Center instructor, had taught her that. Serena noticed that all the people began to gather water and run in one direction in order to put out the fire that was engulfing their village. While everyone was busy, she decided to take a chance and sneak into the hut where Raj was being held. Seeing him unconscious lying on the table, she immediately ran to him to assess his well-being. Shahata saw this, so he immediately started attacking the traveller who had entered his territory and wanted to disturb the peace. His allies came to his aid and Serena realized that she had purposely waited until everyone left to trap her. She tried her best to attack her opponents using swordsmanship techniques, including the red flame shroud technique. Mind saw that the force of her strike was mighty, so decided to back off a bit to get out of the line of the shockwave. Serena immediately took the chance to grab Raj and realized she should get as far away from the area as possible. However, to her great surprise, Raja opened his eyes and suddenly attacked her, wounding her in the neck area. Upon being wounded, Serena immediately threw him off and was very much surprised by his behavior. Raja looked at her and said that she was really amazing. That's why they call her a divine knight. Serena still couldn't believe that her rainforest companion was just like the rest of them. Raja smiled and decided to introduce himself once again, saying that he was the leader of the first village. Serena had managed to escape and she realized that someone had helped her do it, so she wondered who exactly could have done it. She realized that someone had first started a fire that had quickly enough engulfed the entire village and the villagers were busy putting it out. She also remembered that someone had used the sleeping pill loop of eternal sleep, which allowed her to disarm some of the opponents with sleep. She wondered who could have done all this, but she knew she had to do something now, because playing hide-and-seek in the jungle wasn't easy for long. However, a week later, her location was discovered and a team from Mina, Raja and Aisha's allies attacked her. Serena prepared for the confrontation and didn't understand why Raja wasn't angry with her. After all, she had taken the lives of some of his comrades. Raja replied with perfect calmness that his allies were simply weaker than she herself, and that was why they had lost their lives. Serena was horrified at this treatment of her own comrades and prepared to show her full strength. She tried to block her opponent's attacks, but there were 3 of them and each one was quite strong. Raja was also actively attacking, so it was difficult for Serena to counter all of them at once. At some point she did miss a punch and was injured on the side of her back, which took her to a tree by the force of the blow. Aisha's ally seized the moment and did damage to Serena's leg with her spear. Serena tried her best to stay focused on feeling the pain and confronting her opponents. In the meantime, Kane had set up a small camp with the guide, and they even built a campfire for cooking. His guide was horrified when he learned that Kane planned to return to the 5th village to negotiate with Durka. After a bit of thought, Kane said that the guide was probably best used as bait for the villagers of the 5th village. The guide was very scared and didn't understand why he was the one who would have to do such a scary job as a decoy. Kane replied that he already had to do all the work for the two of them, so now it was his turn to help. After a while, the guide really had to go to the 5th village completely alone. He entered the hut of the head of the 5th village of Dirha and said that he had come to hold a conversation as promised. Dirka reported that he and his guest were too late and returned quite late. He said it was probably because the guest had decided to do some more travelling in the rainforest, so he decided to relieve the guide from hunting. Dirka took the guide by the shoulder and asked him not to be afraid because everything that had gone before didn't matter anymore. The main thing was to tell him where the guest was now. The guide did not understand what exactly to answer him, and at that moment Kane entered the cabin and realised that they were talking about him. However, he only showed his presence and immediately disappeared from their sight to trap the village head. Dirka, along with the guide, immediately ran in pursuit of him to catch up with him and hold a conversation. At one point, Kane stopped and climbed a tall fence and sat on it and decided to drink the water that was in the tank. Dirka did not understand his behaviour and said that he was sorry that the guest was so impatient because he just wanted to get his skin. Dropping the water tank, Kane replied that it was only his choice, so he'd have to do a full-blown hunt for him first. In an instant, the whole village began to fill with a tsunami of large water waves, and Dichar realised that the guest was not simple and possessed magic. Climbing onto the roof of one of the huts, Dirka realised that the guest wanted to play catch-up. Kane realised that he had hoped he could flush out Dirch along with an entire village, but realised he hadn't quite succeeded. Dirha summoned Minuano, who was the Lord of the Wind, and ordered him to create a tornado to stop the guest in his escape. Kane was able to dodge this style of attack and realised that his opponent was also quite powerful and strong. Dirka approached the traveller and began attacking him, saying that he knew he was in the Devil's Soul and had been informed of it by a bird. Kane thought about it and didn't understand why it was so important to all of them, exactly which organisations he worked for and completed assignments in. Meanwhile, Serena continued to confront the opponents and she managed to take the life of Aisha's ally so there were fewer opponents. She realised that they were strong and acted together using the technique of changing positions and acting from different distances. At one point, Raja used a throwing technique, and after intercepting the blow, Serena decided to use the battle flame. However, Raja managed to get out of the punchline, and he was getting angrier because he wanted to end the confrontation as quickly as possible. Shata saw that Raja couldn't completely escape the blow, so he decided to use his body as a defensive shield. Realising that he was now all alone, Raja immediately began to attack Serena in order to win. However, after a few blows, he fell and recognised that his strength was also weaker than hers. Raja told her that it was very funny because they were called monsters and she was the real monster. Serena replied that she was human after all and asked what they had done to the person who had assisted her. Raja said she should go to the 5th village because he would be waiting for her there. Raja realised that she wasn't going to keep him alive, so he thanked her for confronting him, saying that he was really having fun. Meanwhile, Dirka asked the Wind Lord Manuano to bestow him with wind to prevail over the traveller. Kane tried to counter the head of the 5th village, but realised that his opponent was much stronger than him, so he missed a few blows from him. Realising this, he summoned the spirit of Balshak to shroud the area in mist and hide it from the enemy's view. Dirka, realising that he was beginning to be enveloped by the fog, called upon Minuano to show him the way to his opponent and clear the fog. At some point, Kane realised that when fire met wind, it amplified its effects, so he decided to use the flame of battle technique. Dirka tried to fend off his attack with the wind and realised that he had made it worse because everything around him was engulfed in fire. Striking the head of the village, he asked why he still wouldn't just give up. However, Dirka, to his surprise, started running away and ran towards the guide who led him to the 5th village. Kane thought that the village head had decided to use the guide's powers and regain his strength that way. To his great surprise, however, he stopped the falling burning branch and thus saved the guide from the first village. Kane realised that Dirka was probably not a beast, so he moved closer to him and asked him not to act rashly. Kane explained that you can't let evil into your heart because it can lead to destruction from within. Dirha realised that he had no other choice, so he agreed to accept the invitation from the organisation and become their allies. The guide was very glad that they were able to settle their issues more peacefully, and there would be no more destruction to come from their battle. Dirka informed that he would be a bit busy now, because he should immediately take care of the rebuilding of the village. Meanwhile, Serena approached the 5th village to look for a saviour, and to her surprise saw the resident she was staying with. Harbour introduced himself and greeted her, because he was really happy to see the Lady Knight. Serena was very surprised because it was Harbour who introduced her to Raj, who then attacked her. Harbour explained that these beasts used to be slaves that the Empire sold to the locals, but chaos reigned even before their arrival. He told the story that one of the slaves began to manifest his immense demonic power, which was very difficult to resist. Harbour explained that this was why he couldn't tell the lady of the Imperial Palace everything, because he himself feared becoming a common prisoner. He explained that 6 years ago an unknown man had come to their lands who was able to confront the beasts and drive them to a standstill. Serena looked very puzzled, especially when she heard that Harbour had only decided to help her after seeing that man's sword in her possession. She immediately began to remember that the 5th instructor had given her this sword, or rather, she had picked it up at the place where he had been robbed of his life. Then she realised that if the instructor hadn't trained all of Harbour, she wouldn't have been able to stand up to so many beasts and monsters. Harbour thanked Serena and said they now had a chance to find peace and a chance to start living their old lives. Serena said it was time for her to keep going towards her goal and fulfill her mission, much to Harbour's surprise, who thought that was her mission. As she said goodbye, she realised that she now had another goal in mind, and that was to follow the trail the instructor had left behind. Serena regretted not being able to see her instructor again, but knew she could finish all his unfinished business. Meanwhile, Kane wandered through the rainforest and realised that he was most likely just lost. However, the instructor of the first training centre came out to him and informed him that he was able to successfully complete the mission. Smiling, she handed him a note with instructions on what he should do on his next mission. After reading the note, Kane was very surprised that his mission was to train apprentices in the 5th training centre. The instructor of the first training centre said that she had to go and then destroyed the tree behind which Harbour was standing. Kane didn't want to hurt his guide, so he asked her to stop since they only had a temporary truce with the southern jungle dwellers. The first instructor said it was only his personal choice, then walked off into the depths of the rainforest. Kane gave Harbour first aid and told him it was time for him to go, while thinking to himself that the training centre wasn't so bad. He realised that keeping an eye on the children was a safe enough thing to do, but he knew he would never teach them his techniques. Harbour looked at him and realised that he would never forget the man who had tried to help them and saved his life. When Kane went to the training centre to become an instructor, he didn't know he would find his eternal rest in a safe place. Meanwhile, Lord Albano's kingdom has fallen into severe decline, and among all, only Iris is left alive. She was just a child and was left all alone in a vast ruined kingdom that was covered with eternal ice. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of her who said his name was Kane Ronald and invited her to go with him. Iris looked at him and didn't understand why he had come to the ruins and why he had the desire to save her from freezing and starving. She looked into his eyes filled with an icy emptiness and, not understanding why he had come for her, agreed to go with him. Kane covered her with his cloak because he realised she was freezing and informed her that elders were to be addressed as you. After a while they arrived in Reuben Valley, and Kane bought the house from Ben's landlord, who was selling it. He understood that the house was being sold at a steep discount because it was in a dilapidated condition. Ben said that he and his daughter would be fine living in the house, but they should have hired a carpenter to do the repairs, but Kane decided to do it all himself. He realised that he didn't have a lot of money to hire a carpenter, so he decided to do it on his own if possible. Ben, observing his diligence in his work, thought Iris's father was a real carpenter. Iris was very shy, and informed Ben that she would stay here to observe the actions of the man who had brought her. In the evening, when it started to get dark, Kane decided to take a break from his hard work and was surprised to find Iris asleep. He didn't understand how she could fall asleep while he himself was doing so much work and thought that she was probably just very tired from the road. He recalled that when he came to the ruins of the ruined kingdom, he was going to find treasure and money. However, to his surprise, he only managed to find an abandoned child who was freezing and shaking from the cold. Kane realised that she may have been orphaned, so he decided to take her with him to be his free maid. Tired from his hard work, he decided to have a little refreshment, but the food he had left on the table was just not there. He looked around and found that his sandwich bag was in the teeth of a fox that was running away towards the forest. After a few moments, he still managed to catch up with the fox and take his rightful dinner from him. But to Kane's surprise, he saw in front of him a wolf that was just incredibly huge. Throwing the fox cub towards the wolf for a distraction, he took the chance to just run away from them far away. Meanwhile, Irina woke up and didn't immediately realise where she was or why she was covered with a cloak. At that moment, Kane came running up to her, telling her to wake up as soon as possible because they'd better get in the house. Irene looked at him and realised that he was also very cold, but he still gave her his cloak for some reason. All Kane could think about was that the price of the house would have already dropped because of the little fox, but he totally didn't expect to see a big wolf. Iris thought that she would have to do her best to repay the man for his kindness and care. She was busy cooking when Ben still decided to approach her, and so he called out to her. He decided to check with her to see if she really planned to eat that bubbly something that was boiling in the pot later. Iris reported that she had planned to give it to Cord when he got home and didn't understand what had happened to Ben's facial expression. Ben realised that this girl was quite independent, but she asked him exactly where to wash her clothes. Ben said he could have done it himself, but having been refused by the girl, he decided at least to accompany her. While Iris was doing laundry, Ben said that this house used to be built by Mr. Graham, who came to the village, and now it was bought again by a stranger. Iris listened to his story, but didn't understand why Mr. Ronald's shirts were so flimsy and dirty. Ben reported that Mr. Graham was a guardian of the forest and travelled the world as a hunter and adventurer. He even admitted to stealing drinks from his father to sit in Graham's company and listen to his fascinating stories. Iris was surprised that Cord didn't have many clothes, but they were all worn out. Meanwhile, Mr. Graham had welcomed the new owner of his house, who was also a traveller. Kane said hello to him and said he would like to purchase some hunter's tools from him, preferably at a low price. Graham said that he wouldn't need them anymore anyway, so he was happy to give them to his guest. However, upon entering the tool vault, Kane found only mountain climbing gloves and a bow amongst the dust and cobwebs. Looking around carefully, Kane was very surprised to find a rather potent poison, and didn't understand what it was for in a peaceful village. Then he discovered some tools that belonged to a rather large organisation and realised that Graham was no ordinary man. Graham had brought him a crate to make it easier to gather the required tools and take them with him. He scrutinised the face of his guest and it seemed very familiar to him, but he could not understand where he had seen it before. Gathering all the tools, Kane thanked the landlord and decided to leave quickly before he recognised him completely. Leaving the house, he ran into Jake, who ran to his grandfather's house to hear again the interesting stories of his travels. Walking back in, Kane was horrified to see that all his designer clothes were more like common floor rags. Ben approached him and informed him that Iris had kindly washed his clothes and he could share his spare. Then he said that Iris was still in the kitchen preparing food, but Ben thought it was better to see for himself. Ben asked him to make up for the damage Iris had done to his kitchen at the inn after cooking. Kane handed him the cash and headed towards Iris, who was sitting at the table waiting for him. She reported that she had finished cooking, and Kane was even more surprised at the colour of the soup she had made, which was more like poison. He asked Iris to sit down at the table too so she could taste her soup of boiled flour and vegetables of various kinds. After a few days, Ben never gave up hope of teaching young Iris how to properly prepare food and make soup. However, he didn't understand how she could so quickly ruin the cream soup they were making together because he was only distracted for a few minutes. He realises that her cooking in his inn could cost him dearly because the cinders and the smell of her food would scare away customers. Ben understood that the girl was trying very hard for Mr. Kane and was putting all her heart into cooking. Iris admitted that she herself realised that she was doing very poorly, so she thought about not cooking any more food. Ben was very kind and tried to support her, saying she was doing great and had already learned how to make meat and vegetable soups. Trying to cheer her up, he said that cooking is a whole art, so it requires a lot of practice. Their conversation was interrupted by a group of visitors who stopped at the inn and asked to be served quickly because they were hungry. Iris wanted to help Ben, but he informed her that these were very dangerous people, so he asked her to sit quietly in the kitchen. He then served all the guests fairly quickly on his own and brought them drinks along with the appetizers and food they requested. Iris continued to stir her soup as she heard the arriving guests talking about Lord Orb's kingdom that had fallen because of them. Overhearing their conversation, she realizes that they were the ones involved in the destruction of her kingdom, which they had turned into ruins. Listening to them discuss her family with negative words, Iris couldn't contain all the anger that filled her. So to the surprise of all the visitors, at one point she threw the cooker right at the head of one of the guests. Coming out to them in the hall, Iris was furious and asked them to take back what they said about her kingdom and family members. In a state of rage, she ordered them to immediately apologise for the horrible words that came out of their mouths. Meanwhile, Kane woke up in his room feeling like something very bad was about to happen. He felt very bad because he had caught a cold because of improperly washed clothes and poisoned himself because of the gourmet meals from Iris. Placing a cold cloth on his head for relief, he thought about how today had been too quiet. Feeling hungry, Kane decided to go down to the inn to get some food and refresh himself. Going downstairs, he heard noises that were too loud and told all the visitors that they were making too much noise. Seeing Iris in the crowd of unfriendly strangers, Kane decided to clarify what was going on there. Kane looked closely at the people in the inn and realised that they were villains and that they were employees hired for certain tasks. The guests of the inn thought the same of him and had already started planning what methods and ways to confront him. However, all their musings and thoughts were interrupted by Iris, who shouted to Kane that he shouldn't come down. Iris said that it was her business and a matter of her own honour, so she planned to handle it herself. The innkeeper started laughing because he realised that most likely the father of the girl who dared to talk to them like that was standing in front of them. After a little thought, he recommended that Kane get down there as soon as possible and figure out why his daughter was doing this to herself in the first place. Kane was furious that Iris had caused him to first go off, then get sick, and now instead of wanting to eat, he was in the middle of a crowd of people. The guests saw Cain up close and realized that he was nothing like the girl's father, so they didn't understand why he was sticking up for her. Cain realized there were too many opponents, so he asked Iris to distract them so they could just run away. However, she didn't understand at all what exactly he wanted to do and thought he had decided to stand up for her and fight back against her opponents. The allies of the innkeepers wanted to win such an inappropriate battle as quickly as possible, but they were stopped by their commander-in-chief. He indicated that he has a desire to deal with violators of their recreation on his own, with the help of his ace up his sleeve. He then decided to use demonic magic and summoned Bordeaux Two-Winged to unleash his power on Cain and the girl. Cain stood still and tried not to show emotionally that he was frightened by his opponent's actions. He was very glad that he, in such a weak state, had managed to dodge the powerful attack that had destroyed half of the inn. Iris was very much surprised that her companion was not at all frightened by the demonic power of the opponents. At some point, Cain realized that he had a chance for a positive confrontation with the opponents who stood watching him. Demonstrating the presence of the sword, Cain informed that he was always driven by one thing, and that was his own pride. One of the allied guests of the inn informed the commander-in-chief that on the arm of the enemy was the emblem of the Free Knights. Everyone had very little information about the organization of the Free Knights, however knew for sure that each of them had the strength of over 100 knights. After assessing their capabilities to Iris's surprise, the opponent smiled sweetly and reported that the conflict was completely over. The commander-in-chief, taking his subordinates away, said that they didn't want to quarrel with the organization of the Free Knights at all. Iris asked everyone to stop because she still wanted them to apologize, but she saw that Cain had just left. Opposing innkeepers recommended the girl to be more careful because this knight is unlikely to always come to her aid. Iris sighed and decided to go see Mr. Cain to talk to him about what had happened and figure out who he was. Cain went back to his room and thought about how he could cure his cold and regain his strength faster. He was very glad that his previous job had saved his life, but didn't understand why he hadn't been able to just eat like he had planned. Feeling tired and sick, Cain decided to sit down to rest and get his thoughts in order. However, he felt it was very unfair that he had never been able to take a quiet retirement and just get on with his existence. Iris came into his room and instead of thanking him for his protection, she started talking about how he shouldn't have gotten involved in their confrontation. Grabbing his head, Cain realized that Iris still hadn't forgotten the place where he'd found her and saved her from being alone and freezing. She looked at him in surprise and replied that she could never forget the place where she was born and raised. However, she was even more surprised when Cain said she should just forget about where she was and what she was attached to. He looked at her and said that she couldn't turn back time and change anything in the past anyway, so he recommended living in the present. Iris shouted that he himself had personally seen exactly what had happened in her kingdom, so he didn't understand how he could ask her to just forget about everything. Cain remained calm and asked how long she was going to live carrying such a heavy burden on her shoulders. Iris tried to hold back the anger that filled her and thought he was only saying that because he didn't understand the pain she was going through. However, looking into the villain's eyes that were filled with emptiness, she realized that he would simply never be able to understand and share her feelings. Iris realized that no one could ever understand her pain, because among all the people of the whole kingdom, she was all alone. Deciding to leave the room, she did turn around and ask Cain what he had taken her with him for. Cain had no desire to give her an answer to that question, so he said he didn't need a reason for this act. Standing up from his chair, he realized that there was no point in fighting Iris's temper, and he hoped that one day she would realize it herself. A few days later, he was very happy that he had finally finished renovating the house, and the last nails in the roof were driven in. As he sat down to rest, he thought about the fact that Iris hadn't left her room at the inn in days and hadn't spoken to him. Admiring the beauty from the roof of the house, he thought he had found the perfect house, because the village was close, but they were separated by a forest. But his thoughts were interrupted by Ben, who asked the Lord to go to the inn as soon as possible, because something had happened there. He was very surprised that Mr. Peña had been able to renovate the house so quickly, and now it looked just lovely. Cain said he was just patching him up a bit and asked what he'd come for, and what exactly had happened at the inn. However, when he realized that the event was related to Iris, he didn't hesitate long before he climbed down from the roof of the house and went to the inn. Meanwhile, after Iris had a fight with Cain, she locked herself in her room and decided to just not come out for a few days. She was completely immersed in her thoughts about being left all alone with no one to help her. At some point, her gaze was drawn to the sunset, and she realized that it was probably her destiny to disappear forever like her entire kingdom. After gathering various supplies, she was determined to go to the forester's house, where the hired men who had defamed her family were staying. Meanwhile, the hired help fished out the very same forester who was once a very famous hunter in the woods. They knew that he was the famous dragon hunter who had disappeared without a trace 30 years ago. Kina Lam was very surprised that a group of hired hands recognized him and didn't understand how they managed to do it. The commander-in-chief realized that this hunter was the only one who could plunder the treasure tomb of one of the dragons and asked where he had hidden everything. Kana said that he could not enter that treasury because it was guarded by a very strong guard. But the commander did not care. He asked for the address. He said that the map with the location of that treasure house was left inside the house he had built in the middle of the woods here 30 years ago. Suddenly, the team heard a strange rustling of leaves from the direction of the forest and decided to check who was following them. However, the only thing they found was a very aggressive fox that was finishing its meal. On returning back, the team member reported that there was no one there, and the shrey was from a common fox that looked a little aggressive. Iris was very frightened when she realized that the house deep in the woods they were talking about belonged to Mr. Kane. She was having doubts because on the one hand she wanted to warn Kane that he might be in danger, and on the other she just didn't want to see him. Iris knew the legend of how long ago there had been a confrontation in the world between the demon gods and the dragons. In doing so, the dragons stole large amounts of treasure and stored it in a great treasury called Draconia. Iris thought that if she could get to the treasure, she could use it to completely rebuild the kingdom. She remembered that her subjects had shouted to her that as demon king she should leave, but no one had ever managed to stay alive. She also remembered Kane, but she didn't want to fill her head with him anymore because their paths had gone in different directions. So she made the decision to simply follow them to find the map of Draconia and restore her kingdom. Along the way, she was very much surprised that many of the hired team had been crushed by a tree, and she thought it was definitely not a simple coincidence. Iris realized that 4 consecutive accidents just couldn't be an ordinary coincidence. Suddenly, she heard a noise and ran with all her legs to see what exactly happened there. She saw a group of hired hands back at Kaina Lembu, and were very angry that he was trying to block their way. However, to their surprise, he confidently stated that he had done nothing of the sort and had never left the clearing where they had left him. Kana made excuses and said he was in their line of sight the whole time, but the hired hands were furious and wouldn't listen to him. Seeing that Kinye was about to lose his life, Iris realized she couldn't just leave it at that and rush to his aid. Suddenly an arrow flew into the enemy's head and the commander-in-chief ordered everyone to scatter. Activating his demonic powers, he ordered the intruder to come out to them, instead of continuing to cowardly hide in the bushes. Serena didn't understand who was attacking everyone, but was glad that now at least the group of hired help had stopped hurting the old man. The commander-in-chief used the ring to summon the spirit of the demon Bordeaux to guide them to their enemy. However, he had no way of detecting their opponent, so he started waving his demonic powers around, destroying everything around him. To preserve her own life, Iris put up a protective magical shield to prevent demonic forces from harming her. With the help of demonic powers, the commander-in-chief destroyed many trees around but still couldn't find anyone. He was filled with anger at not being able to see his own opponent, who had managed to inflict several superficial wounds on him. Serena thought about it. She realized that in such a small and peaceful village it was unlikely that anyone could fight back against an entire team of hired hands. At some point she realized that there was only one person capable of this, and that was Kane Ronald. Kane, hearing from Ben that Iris had gone off to the hiring side at first, was very happy about the event. However, upon entering his room, he was horrified to find that she had taken all the contents from his stash of retirement savings. He had only 2 options. Either Iris had taken his savings herself, or the hired help had done it by siphoning information from Iris. Both options were terrible for Kane, because the water bottle contained all of his jewellery and savings. Since he was an experienced villain, he decided to use the technique of the dragons, who set many simple traps along the way. Having set many traps, Kane initially thought that everything would be resolved simply, but the commander-in-chief was too angry. The main difficulties were the forest animals, because the fox attacking him had time to chew on his bow, and the wolf was crunching the branches around him. Serena heard Kane's voice decide to change tactics and realized she was right when she thought of him. Cheris of the 8 Wings gang was very surprised at how the traveller Kane even knew his name. Kane was very surprised because Cheris himself was demonstrating skills that only one ring user could possess. He was ready to fire an arrow at whoever he thought had stolen his precious savings for a carefree old age during retirement. Cheris didn't understand what they had done to him to make the Free Knight willing to take their lives. To Serena's surprise, Kane replied that when they left the inn he was missing something very dear to him. Serena was embarrassed because she was sure he was talking about her and not his bottle of treasure and savings. Cheris had no idea what the Free Knight was talking about, and asked him to stop because they were doing absolutely nothing of the sort. Seeing that the arrow flew right next to him, Cheris was even more filled with anger that his opponent wanted to intimidate him. Kane was very much surprised by the fact that for the first time in his life he missed and didn't hit a target that wasn't that far away. Cheris shouted for the Free Knight to come out of hiding and show himself to him, and in return promised to tell him where they had taken that girl. Iris thought it was a very sneaky move, but she was sure that the man with the icy gaze would not fall for it. but Kane immediately came down and haughtily asked Cheras where exactly they were keeping Iris. Seeing Kane in front of him, Cheras started laughing loudly, realizing that he had bought into his ruse and saying that they were a really interesting order. Cheras suggested that so little is known about the Free Knights, probably only because they are too gullible and weak. Iris listened to their conversation and didn't understand how she should act in this situation, because she didn't want to give away her presence. Remembering their meeting, she realized that he had reached out to her then because he himself had suffered the pain of losing everyone close to him. Realizing this, she couldn't believe that Kane really cared so much about her, because he saw her as a kindred spirit. Cheras saw Iris behind the tree and realized that now the Free Knight would realize that he had deceived him by saying they had taken her prisoner. Then he decided to use his demonic power and unleash it on the girl his opponent cherished so much. Kane didn't understand why he had to take part in all this, he just wanted his savings back. The evil that came from within him made him sweat, and the mana around him looked extremely unstable because he was already at his limit. Kane realized that using the powers of a demon sealed in an object had a time limit of 600 seconds. He realized that Iris's appearance had completely interfered with his plan, because there were only 2 seconds left before the enemy's magic would expire. Kane realized that he had absolutely no choice left and made the decision in 1 whole 82/10 of a second to stand up for her. Iris was very puzzled that he had made the decision to stand up for her and save her from the demonic strike. Looking into his eyes, she realized that he too had lost all his comrades and was left in this world all alone. Seeing the water in Iris's bag with his savings, Kane was very glad that she was now safe. Cheras, seeing that Kane had repelled his demonic attack, realized that he was the leader of the Free Knights and didn't understand why he was in this village. Iris was even more puzzled when she heard that Kane was the leader of the Free Knights, and she thought it was strange. All Kane could think about was that he wanted to just go home, but he realized that he wouldn't be able to do that, so he said that the Free Knights had already disappeared. Cheras realized that he too wanted to find the treasures of Draconia in order to use them to revive the Order of Free Knights. Iris realized that she and Kane had exactly the same motives because she wanted to use the treasure to rebuild the kingdom. She realized the treasure wouldn't help them bring back the loved ones they longed for, but it would help them recreate what was dear to them. To their surprise, Cheras offered his help in finding the treasure and restoring the Order of Free Knights for 1/10 of what they found. After a bit of thought, Kane said that he had absolutely no thoughts of restoring the former order. Seeing that everyone was very surprised by his statement, he explained that he could not turn back time and revive those who were in the order. Iris realized that he was absolutely right, because she had driven herself into a cage of suffering and longing for loved ones who could not be returned. Taking a few steps forward, Kane asked Cheras not to try to taint his past with the usual human greed. It was at that moment that Iris realized exactly what Kane was trying to convey to her with his advice and recommendations. Kane told Cheras that he had absolutely no need for any dragon treasure, and Cheras couldn't believe it. Preparing to attack, Cheras realized that he was probably purposely saying so in order to take all the treasures just for himself. Iris realized that Kane wasn't lying, because a man who has lost everything becomes apathetic and will have no desire to gain a mountain of treasure. However, she was very surprised when Kane said he wouldn't mind if Cheras actually wished to share the treasure with him. Cheras was filled with anger, and upon hearing such a thing realized that he should send the leader of the Free Knights after his team that was deprived of life. Seeing that everyone was busy, Kane had decided to take advantage of the situation and escape, but Cheras saw this and immediately attacked. He informed him that he had to stay with him to show him the location of the house where the map of Draconia was kept. Kane began to take slow steps, and Cheras laughed at the villain's awakened sense of pity and heroism. However, Kane realized that his plan was working perfectly, as Cheras was trying to control more evil than he could bear. Iris was very surprised when in less than a second Kane had moved closer to Cheras and was standing right next to him. After releasing Kana, Kane said that Cheras's main opponent is his greed, and he's ready to rid him of it. Kana was very surprised that a villain from the Order of Free Knights decided to aid and rescue him. During the confrontation, Kane used swordsmanship to take away the hand of Cheras, who was wearing a ring with a sealed demon on it. Being in a state of rage, Cheras raised his hand and called upon Bordeaux Two-Wing to grant him his wings. Gaining his demon wings, Cheras rushed upwards to leave his position for a full recuperation. Iris didn't understand why Kane was willing to let go of the man who had tried to take his life. Realizing that a man like Cheras would surely return to exact his revenge, she thought for a moment, then called upon Sinus Stormwind of Despair to grant her the power of the Storm of Misery. This force caught up with Cheras rather quickly, causing him multiple pains and twisting him in a storm of misery. Kana thanked Kane for his help because he realized that without his assistance he would have been deprived of his life for sure. As a reward, he offered to give Kane the treasure map of the Great Draconia that everyone had searched so long and hard for. To his surprise, Kane refused and said that the treasures of Draconia were only invented by greedy and avaricious people, which they are not. Kana got frustrated and thought about the fact that Most likely Kane really was right, and no dragon treasure existed. Iris walked over to Kane and with eyes filled with guilt gave him his bag of belongings and items. Kane looked at her, realizing he couldn't just leave her here, and told her to follow him since they were far away from the village. Iris thought about disappointing him and prepared herself for him to kick her out as soon as they reached the village. However, to her great surprise, once they reached the house that Kane had finished renovating, he said it was now their home. Many different thoughts overwhelmed Iris, and she didn't know what it was, whether it was print or joy or regret. But she realized one thing for sure, that from now on her past would only be good memories, and she would now live in the present. Meanwhile, Cheris was tending to his wounds, not understanding where the wind that looked most like magic came from. At some point he realized that Iris possessed knowledge of the Demon King's power that was not available to everyone. He began to anticipate that he could make a lot of money if he sold the girl and her knowledge of the Demon King's power into the right hands. Suddenly Cheris felt very sick and realized it was due to the poison of the demon's five-colored amusement. Remembering the confrontation with Kane, he realized that he had most likely had time to smear his blade with such a potent poison. Cheris didn't understand where Kane had gotten such a potent poison, so he rushed to find an antidote. Suddenly, however, he saw Serena Ravel in front of him, who said she was looking for him to exact revenge. Finally taking his life, Serena looked up at the moon and thought about how she was sure to meet everyone, and soon. Serena recalled that it had been over a decade since she had travelled the continent looking for traces of Kane and his activities. During this time she managed to accomplish a large number of feats that were recognised by humanity, and she managed to restore Ravel's honour. People even nicknamed her the Heavenly Sword, only the memories of the day she last saw Kane had become a burden to her. As she approached the house in the back of the village, Serena remembered Ben's words that the only person fitting the description lived in the house. Opening the door, Serena saw a man sitting in a chair who was Kane and her 5th training center instructor. When Serena saw him, she couldn't contain her emotions and tears came to her eyes because she had waited so long for this meeting. Kane thought it was back to Iris, who once again wanted to feed him her skillful poisonous dishes. However, turning towards the guest, his inner villain sensor started screaming that there was danger in front of him because there was a hero in front of him. Kane was in a state of confusion, especially after the guest said they hadn't seen each other in a whole 10 years. Not fully understanding who exactly came to him, he decided to clarify the purpose of the visit to his house. Serena looked confused and said that she had come to repay a debt that had plagued her for 10 years. Kane was even more startled when Serena decided to bare the blade and informed him that it was his sword. Serena realized that it was this blade that had bound them in strong bonds, and it was the one that should end them. Kane tried to talk her down by saying that forgiveness is a core human value that all should strive for. Seeing that his guest was listening to him, he said that a debt paid with his life would be regarded as nothing more than an escape from responsibility. Serena was puzzled because it had been exactly 10 years since he had taught her how to hold the blade and not to lower it at the sight of an opponent. She decided to clarify exactly how she could earn his forgiveness except at the cost of her own life. Not knowing what to say, Kane just sighed and said he didn't understand why she was taking so long to ask him such childish questions. Realizing everything, Serena got down on one knee and realized that if her teacher wanted her to live, then she would follow his wishes. So she looked at him and vowed that she would be true to her promise as long as her blade remained intact. Kane was very confused because he didn't understand what was going on because he thought Hero had come to take his life. Finally realizing that it was the same Serena Ravelli, he pointed towards a vacant room and said she could take it. As she left, Kane told her that he had put down his sword a long time ago and tried to live a normal, quiet life. Serena was in a state of incomprehension as to whether he was serious about all of this now. Seeing the surprise in her eyes, Kane said he settled in this house to start a family and hear children's laughter, not to be a combatant. Serena couldn't believe what she was hearing because she would never give up on her goals and her path. Her hand shook violently when Kane said that from now on she too would have to live like a normal person. She realized she had already made a vow to be by his side as long as she lived, so she couldn't get into an argument and agreed. Kane was glad his guest had agreed, for now she could be completely unarmed and could no longer suddenly take his life. Serena didn't want to resist her fate. For all these 10 years she had lived only because of the sword that had led her on the right path. Changing into normal clothes, Serena couldn't accept her image because she had never lived a normal life before. It was very hard for Serena to leave her sword in the chest and try to live a normal life like different people did. She was very surprised that after not seeing her teacher for 10 years, he had once again given her valuable advice and she thought she could find her way to happiness. For a moment, she even felt happy to realize that Kane was the one person she could forget all her troubles with. Iris strolled towards the house and thought about what to say so Kane wouldn't scold her for accidentally falling asleep by the hill. However, her thoughts were interrupted by Ben, who said that he had seen that they had a visitor, so he thought that Iris would need help cooking. Iris was horrified when she heard they had a visitor at their house, who Ben said might be an acquaintance of Kane's. She thought that the unexpected guest who suddenly decided to visit such a distant village might have been a hired hand. Dropping the grocery bags, Iris rushed as fast as she could home, hoping that she would make it in time and the guest couldn't hurt Kane. Hearing Kane's voice, Iris immediately calmed down because she realized that he was alive and nothing terrible had happened to him. Getting up from his chair, Kane decided to clarify why Iris was home so late again and what business she was doing. Realizing that she had seen a woman's coat on the rack, he immediately decided to warn her that they had company. Seeing that Serena had already changed and started to leave the room, Kane said that they would all be living together now, so he asked her to introduce herself. Smiling, Serena announced that her name was Sarah, and she was very excited to meet new people. Iris didn't look very happy about such an event, but shook the guest's hand and introduced herself to her. The next morning, Iris was thinking about what to make for lunch, and was very angry that she couldn't sleep because of thoughts of the girl. She didn't understand why Kane had let Sarah stay with them to live in the house, and thought about the fact that they were probably a couple. When she reached the kitchen, Iris couldn't believe her eyes because Sarah was already in the kitchen cooking something. This made her very angry, and she decided to ask her guest what exactly she was doing in the kitchen. Smiling, Sarah said hello and told her that since she had gotten up early, she had decided to make breakfast for everyone. Taking the ladle, Iris ordered Sarah out of the kitchen because cooking was only her job and no one else's. Iris continued to stir the soup, thinking that she wanted to put poison in Sarah's portion, but decided to stop her thoughts. Having learned from Ben how to serve the portions effectively, Iris was sure that Kane would praise her. But to Iris's horror, Sarah had already set the table and made a really very nice setting. Iris was very angry because she saw the salad on the table and realized that Sarah had allowed herself to shamelessly use her kitchen. Serena didn't realize exactly what she had done wrong, but at that moment Kane walked into the kitchen. Much to their surprise, he brought out Deverline, which was made by the prisoners and was considered the cheapest and least tasty drink. Serena knew that the drink was poisonous, even in small amounts, so she was very surprised that Kane had suggested it. Seeing the question in her eyes, he said he wasn't comfortable having a drink alone, especially when they hadn't seen each other in a whole decade. Serena suggested he raise those glasses to the fact that they put down their swords and chose a normal, happy life. Iris was very puzzled and upset that they were talking to each other like this as if no one else was at the table. She realized it was the first time she'd seen Kane so casual, and she was beginning to feel like a third extra at this table. Iris could no longer control her emotions and feelings, so she knocked the glass out of Serena's hands and smashed the drink bottle. Serena looked at Iris and didn't understand why she did this to her, and why she chose to dirty her clothes. Iris stared at her silently, her lips pressed together with anger and hatred, and perhaps even jealousy that overwhelmed her. Kane was confused and didn't understand why Iris had chosen to behave so strangely at the table and interfere with his plans. He was terrified because he'd spiked the drink with the tears of the mad dragon poison, which cost a fortune. Kane was even angrier that he'd managed to take a sip, and the antidote didn't help him because his stomach was starting to hurt. Iris was confused because she realized that she couldn't hold back her emotions and once again did everything wrong. Seeing Kane's eyes filled with emptiness as he stood up and walked towards her, Iris was confused and didn't know what to expect from him. She was sure he was angry because she had ruined everything, however he just put his hand on her head. Iris thought he had probably decided to show mercy and forgive her for another transgression. Kane's only thought at that moment was that he would never forgive Iris for breaking the bottle that contained the very expensive poison. Kane said he doesn't want to fight again because he has absolutely no energy or time for it. Sitting back down at the table, he said he was sorry that the food was now all spoiled, especially the soup. Iris was glad that Kane wasn't upset about the drink, but about her soup, which he hadn't had time to taste, and said she'd go get a new batch. Seeing that everyone had gone about their business, Kane was very upset that now he would have to be the one to clean up the mess. Taking a shower, Serena thought that fighting Iris's anger was futile and should probably just accept her for who she was. She was ashamed that she had intruded into Kane's family idyll and spoiled it with her presence. Back at the table, Serena apologized for ruining their feast with her behavior. Examining Serena, Kane didn't understand why she didn't have any wounds from the poison that had gotten on her skin, so he asked how she was feeling. Serena replied that she felt fine but was very sad that Iris couldn't like her at all. Inside, Kane was furious at having two girls dumped on his head who were ruining all his plans for a good and peaceful old age. Since he couldn't say that, he told Serena that Iris was an orphan, and he had found her among the ruins of the building where she used to live. Serena was very surprised, because she realized that the instructor of the 5th training center had saved Iris's life as well. Their conversation was interrupted by Iris, who had brought new portions of soup from the kitchen and was ready to put them on the table. When everyone had gathered, Kane realized he might have to intervene, so he turned to Iris. Kane told her that that was no way to behave around family members, so he asked her to apologize to Serena. Upon hearing that Serena was now their family, Iris decided to hold back all her feelings and said that she was sorry for how things turned out. Serena realized that she could never be a family. Iris smiled and replied that everything was fine. She thought about the fact that even though their family was small, the change in life was really tangible and meaningful for everyone. Kane thought about the fact that this was the first time they had ever sat at a table all together, but utter chaos reigned, and realized that this was just the beginning. Days later, Iris didn't understand why Kane was calling her to talk or what he wanted from her. Kane repeated that they were all planning to go for a walk, so he asked Iris to get ready so they wouldn't freeze since it was winter outside. Iris didn't think it was a good idea to go camping in such bad weather, but apparently Kane had his reasons. She thought about how she would pack the soup to keep it hot and realized that instead of a plaid, all they had was a worn blanket. Her thoughts were interrupted by Serena, who was sweeping the walkways outside from the snow, and asked if she needed help getting ready for the hike. Iris realized that Sarah knew how to cook, but she didn't want to ask her for help because she wasn't used to the fact that they were family now. Serena said that if Iris needed any help, she would be happy to give it. Iris replied that she didn't need any help while thinking about who she could find to help her with the preparations. Her thoughts were interrupted by Ben, who was also busy clearing snow from the paths and was sure that Iris must really like it when there is a lot of snow. Iris did not share the joy and love of snow at all, thinking that it was very difficult to hunt and defend with it. Ben was a little puzzled by Iris' early visit, and she said she just wanted to ask him something. Realizing exactly what she needed, he immediately packed a whole picnic basket with snacks and a kettle for tea. Iris said she'd be sure to pay him back as soon as she had the chance, but Ben asked her not to worry about anything, saying it was his gift, and asked her to really enjoy the picnic. On the way back, there was a fox lying on the road, and Iris wondered if she should take it with her to give to Kane. However, in 1 second, the fox opened its eyes, grabbed the basket of food, and ran off into the depths of the forest. To begin with, Iris politely asked the fox to give her the picnic basket because she really needed it. The fox waved its tail and continued to run away from her. Iris was furious at this moment and activated her demonic powers. Serena at this point was thinking about the fact that Iris never accepted her, so she decided to make more of an effort to get the girl to like her. When she heard a noise from the forest, she saw a large, aggressive wolf in front of her, heading towards her. Serena realized that if she didn't tame the wolf now, it would surely attack the other villagers. Pushing the wolf away, she realized that it would not soon attack a human now, but Sarah was upset that once again she was not behaving like a normal human. Kane, who was watching her, was surprised that Serena could defeat such a large wolf with a regular broom. He realized that even in the way she was clearing the snow, the movements of the sword path were clearly visible. Kane was scared because he realized that if Serena was also good with a sword, he would have a harder time dealing with her. Remembering how she had easily taken the lives of many instructors of the Shadow of Eternal Sleep organization made him even scarier. Hearing that they were going camping in this weather, Serena was very puzzled, because the weather was not suitable at all. Kane decided to check in with the camping plan because he purposely left a lot of traps in the woods to better recognize Serena's abilities. He realized that the bad weather had spoiled his plans a bit, and now he himself might be in danger, but he didn't want to postpone the trip. Iris came home, and showing her basket and plaid said she had already prepared everything for the hike. Kane praised her, but was very much surprised when she had time to prepare everything so well and hoped the food wasn't poisoned. Serena reported that she too was ready for the hike, and complimented Iris on being able to get everything ready so well for the picnic. Taking all the supplies, Kane said they could head out and thought about the fact that he would finally be able to guide them through his villainous route. After a while, Iris realized that she was very tired, although she was sure that she couldn't get tired from an ordinary walk. She was very angry because she didn't understand how Serena could also go so long to keep up with Kane, who was a first-class knight. There was a creek in their path, and Serena offered to help Iris, but she said she didn't need it at all. However, at one point, Iris stepped on a very slippery rock and was unable to keep her balance and began to fall. Kane heard Iris falling and immediately rushed to her and caught her so that the girl wouldn't fall into the river. Iris was very angry with him and pushed him away, saying that she was fine and could handle it herself. As he fell, Kane realized that he had fallen into his own trap, which he had prepared so carefully beforehand. He planned for Serena to slip on the oiled rocks or step on the poison needle he'd prepared in advance. Kane didn't understand why things hadn't gone completely according to his plan, and decided to focus because he was falling on the sharp rocks he had laid out himself. However, as he fell, he caught a needle that he had smeared with paralyzing poison and realized that his whole plan had just fallen apart. The only thing he was glad about was that he had brought the antidote with him, just in case he had time to use it. Iris, feeling guilty again, looked at Kane and said she hadn't asked him to help her. She didn't understand why she said that, because she just wanted to apologize to him for pushing him into the creek. Kane said he was fine and walked forward, asking the others to be more careful and cautious than he was. Then he spread out their picnic blanket right under the many icicles that hung from the branches of the trees. Everyone looked at Kane and realized that the water in the creek was ice cold and he was completely wet. Iris said she was going to go look for kindling to make tea, and Serena said she would go with her. Serena smiled and asked Iris, hoping she wouldn't mind them going out for kindling together. Iris couldn't understand how she felt because she had already accepted Sarah's appearance, but her body instinctively protested to her. Walking a little deeper into the forest, Iris asked Serena to stop tailing her like she was her probation officer. Serena said Iris was right because if they split up, they'd get the firewood much faster. Kane was left all alone and sneezing from the cold, not understanding why he was so unlucky and why he had fallen into his own trap. His thoughts were interrupted by the crunch of snow, and he turned around and was terrified because in front of him stood a fox and a wolf who were very hungry. Meanwhile, Iris had already gathered enough kindling and hoped that Kane would now be able to keep warm. For a moment, she thought it very strange to have such a large number of dry branches in the middle of winter. Her thoughts were interrupted by Serena saying that they had collected enough twigs and could go back. Seeing Serena's tiredness, Iris realized that she had purposely scattered so many branches in her path and was grateful for it. Meanwhile, Kane didn't understand why the wolf and fox had decided to come out now, since he didn't consider himself an easy appetizer for them. He realized that he hadn't fully coped with the effects of the poison paralyzing his body, so he tried to keep himself collected. Remembering that he had a pouch of serpentine powder hanging on his belt, he decided to spray it on the beasts to make them feel dizzy. When he realized that there was no reaction, he remembered that the pool was in the river, and therefore the contents of the bag had probably just washed away. To his surprise, however, the fox and the wolf vanished in different directions in a second, and Kane didn't understand what had frightened them so much. Turning around, he saw Iris and Serena holding a lot of kindling and saying they had already gone back. After making a fire, they began to prepare tea to warm themselves after such a hard journey. The sunlight made the icicles on the trees shimmer with different colours, and Serena said that it was really beautiful here. To her surprise, Iris poured her tea and held it out to her, for which Serena thanked her profusely. Serena thanked Iris, saying that the tea was delicious and filled her soul with warmth. Iris was embarrassed and thought that she hadn't done anything special but just poured her tea. Kane reported that his tea was a little cold because it was the snow that had fallen on it from the heat coming from the fire. Iris and Serena began to laugh, and Kane felt himself begin to be filled with feelings he had never known before, and even liked. As time passed in the spring, Kane was gathering and rejoiced as he looked into the box that held his two riches. He asked Iris and Serena to take up needlework so that they could earn some money on their own because his savings were running out. However, he had no idea that they could learn to embroider such beautiful images in a short period of time. Gathering, he dreamed of selling dearly their embroidery in order to buy the strongest poison and finally take the hero's life. And after that, he planned to banish Iris and hire a humble servant to finally rest on his pension. At breakfast, he announced that he planned to leave for a couple of days to settle some business. To himself, Kane thought he'd just buy the poison to finally get rid of Serena and her benevolence. Serena noticed that Kane had started going to the market a lot and decided to offer him her help, but he said he could handle it himself. Iris looked at Serena and realized that she too was worried about Kane's safety, since not even criminals went into their part of the forest. Kane asked Serena to stick around after the meal because he planned to discuss one thing with her. Walking into her room, Serena was very surprised that Kane had asked her for her sword for a while. Since she trusted him completely, she decided to put her sword in his use without further question. Kane couldn't contain his joy as he finally managed to leave the best swordsman among the heroes completely unarmed. Serena was a little surprised when she realized that Kane was actually in a good mood. Kane was already anticipating the moment when he would be able to make an exact copy of her sword, which would simply collapse at the most crucial moment. Seeing Kane leaving, Serena held out her hand to Iris and asked if she wanted to go and see him off. Iris took his hand and said she would gladly go along with her to see Kane off. As they bade him farewell, they wished him a good journey and asked him to return soon. Iris was very angry that Kane hadn't even turned around or said a word when he had gone off to do his own thing. Serena told her not to get so upset because she was sure that he wasn't such an icy and cold person at heart. Iris was even more pissed off that Serena was trying to justify his actions, so she wrenched her hand away and walked forward. Serena, trying to catch up with Iris, asked her not to be angry and to wait a bit so they could just go home together. A few days later, Serena came home with groceries and saw that Iris was unusually sad. Iris said she was sad that it had been so many days but Kane still hadn't returned. Serena told her not to worry because he had definitely not lost his combat experience and thought about the passers-by she had met at the market. They spoke of being very afraid that criminals might attack their village at any time. Paying for her groceries, Serena tried to remain calm and not let her thoughts revert to her former heroics. On the way back, she met Ben, who told her he was worried about criminals who might rob his inn. Ben admitted that because of his worries, he had even bought a sword, but he didn't know anything about swords. Serena reported that she knew a little about swords and asked Ben to show it to her. Taking the sword, Serena was horrified because he had given her a very same sword that Kane had left with a few days ago. Ben reported that a few days ago a guy had passed through their village and said he found this sword in the woods soiled. Serena was very startled when Ben added that he had found the sword among a large pile of lifeless bodies of criminals in the woods. Ben hypothesized that most likely the criminals just didn't share something among themselves, so that's what happened. Serena asked Ben to sell her the sword and said she was willing to pay any amount he named. She couldn't understand why Kane had left the sword that was so dear to her just in the woods because she didn't believe anything could happen to it. Iris tried to shout to Serena because she didn't understand why she hadn't even touched her food and what was bothering her so much. Hearing that Serena had just had a bad dream, Iris said she would go to bed because she wasn't feeling well. Serena went to the woods because she couldn't figure out what reason Kane had for leaving his sword in the woods. She recalled that 10 years ago Kane had protected her and had been seriously injured falling off a cliff at the risk of his own life. Serena wanted to go home, but to her surprise, she found fresh footprints on the ground. She knew the villagers didn't walk this far even at night, and the foot size was male, but larger than Kane's. Serena realized that the tracks led directly to their house, which meant they were uninvited guests and Iris could be in danger. Meanwhile, Iris was being taken hostage and one of the intruders realized it was the wrong girl. The second perp said she seemed to have an older sister, so he decided to check every room in the house. The first offender was even more surprised when she found men's clothes in the house. Because they got information from the locals that the two sisters were living in the house all alone. As they approached the house, Serena realized that she had made a big mistake leaving Iris all alone in the house when everyone was talking about criminals. However, she overheard them talking about how they had already suffered heavy losses because they were attacked by some guy in the woods. They have not yet been able to determine whether he was captured or whether he managed to escape. Serena opened the door and asked them what exactly they were forgetting in her house at this late hour. The opponents were very happy that the older sister had come to them on her own, and they wouldn't have to waste time looking for her. They replied that they only needed her to obediently go with them and no nonsense so her little sister wouldn't get hurt. Serena replied that she would do what they wanted, but if they hurt her sister, they would have to pay for it with their own lives. Letting the criminals take the sword away from her, Serena mentally apologized to Iris as she only wanted to know what happened to Kane. The perpetrator immediately used sleeping pills to prevent the two sisters from seeing exactly where they would be taken. After a while, Serena was very glad that Iris was finally conscious and awake. She informed her that she had already slept for 3 whole days, so she was very worried about her condition. Iris realized that they were in some kind of dungeon, most likely a den of criminals. Serena stroked Iris' head because she felt guilty for her, but she really wanted to know exactly what had happened to Kane. Several criminals tried to stop their captain who wanted to enter the girl's cell. They tried to explain to him that he couldn't go in there because if the boss found out, it would only make things worse. The captain just attacked a few of them and said that if they remained silent, no one would know anything. The captain then entered the dungeon to the girls and Serena immediately hid Iris behind her back. Kurugo was the captain of the snake outlaws in the forest and didn't understand how such young girls weren't afraid of him and looked him straight in the eye. Serena wasn't afraid of him and asked what exactly happened to his soldiers in the woods when they were attacked by a guy unknown to them. Kurugo said that the guy was really strong and even managed to leave a few scratches on him, however paid for it with his life. Serena didn't believe him, so she asked what exactly happened next and how exactly he was able to take his life. Kurugo said that the last thing he saw in his life was his axe, and then one it fell into the river and they couldn't find it. Serena decided to ask if he had given his name, and Kurugo laughingly replied that he had managed to introduce himself as Kane Ronald. Iris started screaming that it was a lie because she couldn't believe it could even happen. Serena lowered her head and couldn't understand why it was happening again, and she had lost him again when she could have done her duty. Unable to bear the bitterness that overflowed her soul, Serena struck Kurugo with her bare hands, not realizing how he dared to do that to Kane. Serena realized that from this moment on she would never again hold back her emotions and hide her swordsman's strength. The captain and his servants couldn't understand how a simple village girl had so much powerful strength in her. Kurugo ordered all his soldiers to immediately take the life of this girl who dared to give him such a blow. Serena blocked her opponent's blows with ease, and at one point regained her sword. Serena really didn't hold back her skills any longer, and took the lives of all her opponents in a matter of seconds. Iris was shocked by what she saw, and didn't even immediately realize what had happened, or why Serena had done that. Kurugo came to his senses and didn't realize who Serena was that she could handle his best soldiers so quickly. Serena asked him to watch carefully and informed him that he was about to be punished for his actions with the purple flame. Watching what was happening, Iris stopped realizing who Serena really was, and why she had been hiding her face all this time. She realized why she was gripped with fear at the sight of Serena because it was a primal animal instinct of self-preservation. Iris looked at Serena and realized that she wasn't their enemy but didn't realize what kind of monster she was then. As a demon king, Iris was filled with doubt. She realized that if she let such a monster live, then one day she might hurt them. Then she decided to summon Sibit, whose gaze could span the heavens, to make sure Cain was alive and well. Summoning Sabita, she asked him if Karugo had told the truth before he was robbed of his life. Sibit replied to his mistress that captain had told them the plain truth. Then Iris was seized with terror and rage. The arriving reinforcements of criminals looked at the girl and did not understand who could have caused such chaos in their lair. Making an attack, Iris took the lives of all of them at once and calmly walked straight through them to catch up with Serena. She then ordered Sibit to investigate this place and not let the fire engulf Serena and keep her life safe. Iris broke the seal of imprisonment from the demon Acnal, who was the great ruler of fire, and ordered him to destroy the place completely. Meanwhile, Serena kept moving forward, and with each battle she realized that her opponents were too weak, so she didn't understand how Cain could lose. Serena knew that Cain was the man who had taught her all of this and didn't want to believe that he was gone. Her thoughts were interrupted by the opponents who sought to surround her, to make an assault and attack all together. Serena blocked their attacks with ease and used her sword to return their arrows and throwing stars. The opponents began to be filled with fear because they didn't understand how a simple girl could be so fast and strong. After attacking all of the opponents, Serena saw that only one of them remained in her path, who was fully equipped and also holding a sword. Serena was very surprised that her opponent was able to block her shot because no one has ever been able to do that before. On her second attempt, her opponent blocked her strike again, and she didn't realize who could have such a perfect sword skill. Then she decided to attack with the flame sword technique, but to her surprise the opponent was able to dodge her blow. For a moment, Serena thought it was most likely just plain luck and nothing more. She didn't plan on losing in this confrontation, so she wondered how long her opponent would be able to hold out. Meanwhile, Iris continued to spread the fire, realizing that it was completely impossible to put it out with either water or sand. Realizing that the fire had some other nature of origin, the opponents tried to flee. Controlling the fire, Iris summoned Sebit again and asked him if they were far from Serena. Sabit was silent, however, and Iris didn't understand why he was silent or what he was hiding from her. Later, Sebit turned to his mistress and asked her to be careful not to use up so much mana at once. Iris asked not to worry about her condition, because that was the lot of ordinary wizards and she was a real devil. Meanwhile, Serena continued to attack her opponent and was very surprised at his resilience and sword skills. At some point, she noticed that someone called Cain was attacking opponents not far away from her. Her opponent, seeing that Serena was confused, decided to take the chance and counterattack. However, she easily pushed him away because she wanted to get closer to the other battle to see if Cain was there. Cain recalled going on a trip to the market to sell embroidery, and sitting down for a snack, he realized he was under attack. After being wounded in the shoulder area, he started looking around because he didn't realize who could have attacked him that way. Turning around, he saw before him the true leader of the Order of Free Knights, Canis Ronald. Cain, who was actually Craig Swan, was surprised by the encounter and didn't understand how Cain could find him in the middle of nowhere. Cain answered that it was quite simple, for he himself had introduced himself everywhere by his name, so he had begun to have difficulties because of it. Cain admitted that he had lived all those long years for the sole purpose of getting revenge on Craig for destroying his order. Cain remembered that the Order of Free Knights had once been an organization with two groups of people. Some were old-fashioned knights, and the others were very violent, and wanted to overthrow the king and take his place in the apparatus of government. Crane knew that he was the cause of the Order's destruction, because that's when he was accumulating his savings. And he did it with the help of theft, which he carefully concealed by planting evidence of it on other participants, bleating cold sweat from fear. Crane knew he might have only one way out now, and that was to escape. So he decided to talk Cain up in order to distract him from the action going on. Cain really fell for his tricks and began to listen intently to Crane, from which his gaze was filled with rage. Crane took the chance and threw his sword towards his opponent to keep distance between them. Cain was furious that his opponent dared to leave his sword behind, which meant he no longer had a shred of knightly honor and dignity left in him. Then he saw that Crane had sprayed a bag of smoke just to get out of sight. Taking advantage of the situation, Craig Swan ran as hard as he could to escape the enemy's sight. After fleeing to a safe distance, he found that he had lost all his supplies along the way, including the precious embroidery he had planned to sell. This made Craig very upset, and he realized that once again his whole plan had gone completely wrong. As he looked around, he realized that he had to go home, or he would either starve to death or die at the hands of the real Cain. Craig felt very sorry for himself and didn't understand why he had been given all this suffering and trials that he didn't deserve at all. At some point along the way, he stopped in horror because there were about 20 lifeless bodies in the clearing. After examining their wounds carefully, he realized that only one man, Cain Ronald, could have done this. Craig cried at the realization of his own helplessness, because after looking all around, he still couldn't find the embroidery box. His thoughts were interrupted by the voices, so Craig realized that someone approaching the place had decided to lie among the lifeless bodies. He overheard the other outlaws discussing that their captain had managed to take the life of one Cain Ronald and take all his treasure. They realized that they were only executors, so they could not even imagine what kind of treasure the captain had appropriated. After gathering his gear, Craig realized that he needed to pay a visit to the criminal's lair in order to retrieve his box. At night, he reached the lair of the criminal, realizing that if he made a single mistake, he would immediately go to eternal rest. Craig decided not to take the direct route, but to use his personal methods, and so he searched for a secret entrance. Finding the secret passage, he was very glad that he had managed to get in without much effort. Looking around, he couldn't tell which room he had entered, because the inside was too clean and the walls contained soundproofing materials. On the table, Craig found 12 sheets that were scribbled on both sides with the Dark River cipher. His thoughts were interrupted by the click of the front door lock, and he realized that he should leave the place immediately. However, as he was running away, he saw an enemy in his path and was completely unaware of who it was or where it had come from so quickly. Craig realized he had no time to think, so he decided to trust his instincts and improvise. However, his opponent was quick and easy enough to block and dodge his attacks as he approached him. Craig then used stealth and dropped his sword, which distracted his opponent's attention and allowed him to strike at him. Realizing that he had won the confrontation, Craig wanted to check all the places for the stash, but knew he didn't have much time. For the purpose of disguise, Craig decided to borrow the enemy's mask in order to be able to continue his search. However, Everett Blood entered the room and greeted Mr. Twelfth and got down on one knee before him. Craig didn't understand what was going on, but he realized that this organization was much larger than the Night Wanderers. Everett continued to report that they had failed to find the key, but had managed to find the treasure they had gotten in the battle with Cain Ronald. Craig realized that since the man in front of him was beneath him in rank, he decided to just nod and not make any unnecessary noises. He further learned from the report that their captain was able to inflict multiple blows on Cain, so they collected his treasure. Everett reported that he had kindly hidden all the treasures in a hiding place, so he asked to follow him to inspect them. Craig decided to follow him because he realized it was the only way he could get his treasure, and then just run away. As he stepped out into this hallway, he was surprised to hear the sounds of battle, but decided not to pay much attention to it. Everett opened the cache and took out Cain Ronald's sword, saying that it was the most valuable thing he had with him, discovered the sword Undefeated Song. Everett recalled that the Undefeated Song was one of the 27 greatest swords on the entire globe. In the corner of the stash, Craig saw his precious embroidered handkerchiefs that he had carried to market and didn't understand how they could do this to them. Everett heard noises from outside the dungeon and said he would go check what had happened there, and then return. Picking up the embroidered handkerchiefs from the floor, Craig thought he should probably take a chance and just run away. However, his thoughts were interrupted by a sudden attack, and Everett immediately returned to assist his master. The attacker turned out to be Cain Ronald, who said he had returned to avenge the perpetrators for what they had done to him. Craig didn't understand how Cain was able to survive after everything that had happened to him, and then he thought he had applied a heroic miracle. He realized that it only meant that Cain had gone beyond his limits, which meant he had to find a way to just escape. Suddenly, Craig saw Serena and stopped realizing what exactly was going on in this strange place. Cain Ronald looked at Serena and asked her who she was, since she had just shown up and was already annoying him a lot. Since he really didn't like her look, he immediately decided to attack her without a second thought. Seeing that Serena and Cain were busy confronting each other, Craig realized that he had a chance to just run away and leave the place. Serena couldn't control her anger, because she realized that even though Ronald Cain was in front of her, he wasn't the one she was looking for. Craig decided to take a chance, so he put on his mask and rushed forward with all his might. However, at that moment, Iris entered the room and saw that Serena was in an unequal battle and summoned Arnelt. Han Shi-hyuk didn't like everything he read, but the text said that there were 2 surviving children among all the inhabitants. Serena, using Flames of Fire, immediately aimed her first attack at Cain Ronald and took his life with a single swing of her sword. After that, she gathered all her strength and aimed her second crushing blow at the opponent who was wearing the mask. Craig realized that he had only 0.1% chance of staying alive after such a blow. Being a second away from striking Serena, didn't realize what was happening because her opponent suddenly removed his mask. Iris watched what was going on and increasingly stopped realizing what was going on around her. Serena held her opponent's sword and didn't know if she thought it was the same instructor of the 5th training center or not. Craig hoped he had calculated correctly and distracted Serena in time to suffer a very difficult wound, but stay alive. Serena looked at Craig and didn't understand why he was here and how dare she raise his own sword against himself. She was ashamed, but she was glad that she had missed and that he was alive despite the wound. At that moment, Cain, who is reborn like a phoenix and who was happy to see Craig, reappeared behind them. Serena was furious that after being hit so hard, the enemy was still alive and about to launch an attack on them. However, Craig took her by the shoulder and told her to get some rest already, because it was already his personal business. Serena was surprised because after such an injury he could hardly move, but his confident look inspired confidence. She realized that she couldn't worry about him at all because he was the one who taught her how to hold a sword and use it in battles. Serena knew he was her only teacher, and Craig hoped she had calmed down and wouldn't attack him again. Cain wanted revenge for filling his life with remorse and despair, and Craig wanted revenge for the lost treasure. To Serena and Iris's surprise, Craig said that Cain should pay for raising his hand to the most precious thing he had. Cain Ronald was very surprised that a villain like Craig could be worried about some girls. Craig didn't know what he was talking about, because he was talking about the embroidered shawls that he planned to sell dearly and start a quiet life. Quiet. Their confrontation was long until Craig was filled with rage and anger and took Cain Ronald's life. Craig thought that he was already very tired from the battle, because age was taking its toll on his abilities. Watching Serena, he realized that she was a heroine because she easily overcame all the traps that were in her way. He realized that in order to take Serena's life, he would have to ask for help from the Demon King who was no longer there. Even more surprising to Craig was when he saw Iris slowly coming up behind them. Since Serena was unconscious, he threw her on his shoulders, took Iris by the arm, and said it was time for them to go home. When they left, the most powerful man on Earth came to Cain Ronald's body and used magic to absolve him of his sins. A few days later, Iris was walking down the street and angry that Cain, who was Craig, was refusing to take his medication. She didn't understand why he refused to take his medication and asked her to learn how to cook if she really wanted to help him. As she approached Ben's inn, she heard a strange accent and thought there were people from the Turion people there. What surprised her even more was a girl with blue hair that she had never seen here before, but she seemed familiar. Her musings were interrupted by Ben, who called out to her and specified exactly what she had come to him for. Iris said she's trying to understand why someone who needs medication refuses to take it. Ben replied that there could be two reasons: either there is no money, or the person is so sick that medication just won't help. Then Iris realized that they probably didn't really have any money, because they had spent a lot on the house and its improvement. She asked if the medications were really that expensive, and Ben said that unfortunately they were getting more expensive every day. Ben admitted that he had a small supply of medicine, but he couldn't just give it away, not even to Iris. After a bit of thinking, Ben started to glow with happiness and said he had a great idea, then asked Iris to change. After changing into a waiter, Iris realized that she didn't really like Ben's idea, but she had no other choice. Walking back down to the banquet hall, Iris was very surprised to see Serena behind the counter in the same uniform. Serena and Iris admitted to each other that they didn't like the uniforms very much, however they both had the same goal in mind. Iris admitted that she wanted to keep things a secret from Cain and ended up dragging Serena into the mix. Serena said she was only too happy to help because she also wanted to make money for Cain's medication, which she felt guilty about. Ben told the girls that they looked just delightful and was glad they had agreed to work at his inn while there were many guests. The guests began to arrive at the tavern, and as they looked around they thought the place was even better than they had imagined. Serena bowed and greeted all the guests who had arrived at the Star Tavern. Iris was very surprised at Serena's neatness, as her greeting made her feel like she had a glowing halo on her head. The lodgers also said hello and said they would like to start by taking their rooms and unpacking. Iris wondered if there was anything Serena couldn't do, and on the other hand, she realized that she herself was hiding her identity. Once seated, the guests began to order, and Iris went round to each table to collect orders. Then she walked over to Ben and began dictating to him the list of dishes that the guests of all the tables had ordered. Ben asked her to take her time, because there was absolutely no time for her to write down everything the guests had ordered. He didn't understand how Iris could memorize so many dishes at once, and asked her to pass out the drinks for now. Iris delivered the orders, and Serena worked as a bartender and helped Ben in the kitchen with serving the food. Suddenly Serena started shaking with fear, so much so that she even broke a glass, and Ben came out to see what happened. However, after he came out into the hall, he too started looking very scared, and the guests didn't understand what was going on. Cain stood before them, whom they had not expected to see in the inn, for everything was done in secret from him. Cain scrutinized Serena and Iris with a disapproving look and asked what exactly they were doing here. A few hours ago, Cain had been looking at everything of value he had thought about and thinking about what exactly he should sell to rebuild his budget. He realized that the most expensive items he could sell would be in town, but he wouldn't get to it. But he remembered what everyone was saying about the tourists. Entering the tavern to meet the tourists, he was furious when he saw his girls who had decided to make money in secret from him. Cain reported that they needed to talk, so he asked Ben to let them go home immediately. Ben was very nervous because he needed help and suggested that Cain talk to him outside because no one would hear them there. Serena realized that she shouldn't have set out to make money without the consent of the brave swordsman Cain. Serena knew she just wanted to help, but in the end her recklessness only hurt the honor of the one who cared for them. Iris didn't understand what was going on with Cain, and was surprised when Serena said they had hurt his honor and dignity. On the street, Ben tried to explain to him that the girls only wanted to earn money for his medication and had no other goals. Kane said he just doesn't need that kind of medicine in such a weird way. He understood that the guests were natives of the Churion people, who monopolized virtually all the trade transactions, so he was sure that Ben had simply decided to use the girls' labor for his own purposes for practically nothing. Ben understood exactly what Kane meant, so he offered him a deal for 10% of all sales. Kane realized it was a good offer, but decided to up the ante and said he didn't think Ben planned to profit off his family. Ben stood in the doorway and said he was willing to give him 30% if only he would let the girls help him with sales. He cried and begged Kane to agree because he realized that one could not serve all the guests at once. Kane said he couldn't just lie in bed while his family worked and said he'd help out too, but for 35%. Iris, meanwhile, was eavesdropping on the conversation and was very glad that Kane had agreed and let them work to buy medicine. Entering the inn back, Iris realized that a lot of people were already showing their displeasure because they were waiting too long for their orders. After changing, Kane asked Serena to clear the counter for him because he realized he couldn't run around the guests like that. Serena agreed, and Kane immediately began taking drink orders and preparing them. While preparing Requiem for Dragons, he began telling visitors that the drink had been invented by the 7th Emperor himself. The guests were getting curious, and Kane told them that the drink was made from inexpensive ingredients because the Emperor believed that honor had no luxuries. The whole hall of guests listened attentively to the fact that the basis of the cocktail was the most ordinary water. Iris was very surprised at such abilities of Kane, who said that the real drink was infused in the cool mountain wind. As Kane finished preparing the drink, he reported that it was imbued with the same pride with which mountains stood and oceans spilled. Serena realized that all the words he said were addressed to her, and she convinced herself to try harder. Iris was glad Kane looked so good and didn't scold them, so she promised herself to work much better and faster too. Everyone was busy with their work, and the guests after this narration decided to order simpler dishes to enjoy the food. Iris was carrying a tray of dirty dishes, and at some point a bottle slipped under her feet. Seeing this, Serena immediately ran to her aid so she wouldn't have time to fall and hit herself. Catching her, she asked Iris if she was all right, and receiving a positive answer, she was glad. Iris said she had a tray of dishes in her hands and didn't realize where it went. Then turning around, they saw that the tray was heading towards Kane, and realized that disaster was only moments away. Stopping the tray, Kane realized that all the dishes were about to go flying in different directions, and next to him was a cabinet of expensive drinks. He couldn't let that happen, because he realized that in that case all their earnings would stay with Ben as payment for the broken bottles. Then he very quickly began calculating the trajectory of the falls in his head, and immediately keeping his balance catching the kitchen utensils. He was very angry with Iris and Serena and didn't understand why they had some sort of incident every day. Looking carefully at the tray, he realized that there was an empty space on it, which meant that one of the wooden plates was missing. Serena and Iris were terrified because they saw the closet rapidly falling on Kane, and he didn't have time to do anything about it. A few days later, Ben asked Iris about Kane's well-being because he realized that he had been seriously injured again. Ben told her that the guests had already started to leave so they didn't have to work with Serena anymore, and he had already hired an employee. Iris agreed and said that she would then go to Kane's house to give him help and care. Ben asked her to be careful because he had heard that a goblin had appeared in the neighborhood and was attacking pets. He asked her how long she'd seen Jake because he'd gotten so used to him that he didn't understand why he'd been away for so long. As he left, Iris said she would let him know if she met Jake or his wife Janice. Meanwhile, Serena knocked on Kane's room and told him that she had brought him some food since it was already lunchtime. Kane asked her to come in and tried to pretend he wasn't in any pain at all, when in fact he wasn't. He knew he couldn't get rid of Serena that easily, so he decided to turn her heroic sympathy for the sick man to his advantage. For starters, Kane complimented her food and informed her that she was a very good cook, then began coughing heavily along with fluid from her bitten cheek. Serena, watching this, was very much startled and asked him if he had seen a healer. Kane said that he had been to a healer not long ago, and the healer had told him that he had only a year to live. Serena was horrified by such news, especially after Kane asked her not to tell Iris anything and to keep it a secret. As soon as she left his room, Kane was overjoyed because he realized that the plan had worked and he was now safe. Serena stepped out into the fresh air to get her thoughts in order because she was sorry they only had a year left. She decided not to look at the situation in a negative way and to dedicate this year with no regrets just to Kane and his care. Walking through the forest and thinking about how she could thank him for his knowledge, Serena was very surprised to see Iris. Iris was very frightened because she didn't expect to find Serena in the woods because she was supposed to be at home. Serena looked at Iris and didn't understand why she had become so abrupt and saw unconcealed evil in her eyes. She wanted to tell her all about Kane but couldn't, so she asked her to go and check on him because he was eating now. Once Iris was gone, Serena decided to figure out what exactly she was doing in the woods at this hour, and why the ground near her was digging over. She thought about the fact that Iris was indeed visiting the forest more and more often, and she had no reason for her actions. Digging the hole, Serena was very surprised to see a jar of magical herbs and the body of a rabbit that was completely devoid of life energy. Serena realized that only goblins could do such a thing, and didn't understand why Iris was in this particular place. After a little thought, she began to realize that she was most likely not mistaken and Iris was actually a demon. Iris hoped Serena wouldn't figure it all out, otherwise she would have to take her life. Thinking more and more about it, she intuitively began to summon a wind demon that could destroy everything in its path. Iris was plagued by doubts because she remembered how Serena had helped her, and accepted her for who she was. Realizing that she couldn't hurt the man who had taken her in, Iris sealed the demon's soul and headed for Cain. She realized that he had already been fed soup, so she decided to get him some water, but she heard a scream from his room. Running into the room, Iris saw that he had spilled hot mashed potato soup on himself, so she immediately decided to cool it down with water from a pitcher. Cain didn't understand why Iris had come. After all, he'd done it all on purpose to make Serena feel even more sorry for him. Iris thought about the fact that even though they had been together for a long time, she didn't understand Cain and why he had taken her from the ruined castle. She decided to consult with him about what to do if rumours spread around the village that a goblin had appeared in the forest. Cain said that goblins never just come around, so it was best to talk to him and see what he needed. Iris was very surprised because she hadn't thought it was possible to have a dialogue with goblins. Cain answered her that goblins were reasonable enough creatures and didn't have to solve everything by force alone. Having received such a reply, Iris said that she had to go on her important business and left his room. She realized that if Serena and Cain found out she was a demon, they would never be able to look at her the same way again. Iris remembered how in her kingdom she had taken the lives of people who attacked them with her own strength. Though she was surprised by Cain's answer that goblins could just be talked to, she still didn't see how it could be done. Her thoughts were interrupted by the appearance of Serena, who was looking at her very strangely, and she thought Serena had figured it out. However, Serena smiled and said she came back early because she wanted to make dinner for everyone on her own. Their conversation was interrupted by Cain, who had come out of the room and was watching them intently, thinking about something of his own. Serena said it was too early for him to get out of bed, but he said he was fine and needed to go for a walk with Iris. Iris didn't understand where he wanted to go with her, because she had to get to the tavern and continue her work. Serena said she'd be happy to fill in for her at the tavern so they could go about their business. Iris thanked Serena for her help and asked Cain to wait for her so she could change. Serena looked at her and thought that she was completely lacking in hard evidence that she was a demon. She knew that there used to be a clan of demons that had large reserves of mana that allowed them to wreak terror among humans. According to legend, humans began to unite for a great confrontation after which the Demon King fell. Serena wondered if Cain knew that Iris, whom he had rescued and sheltered, was a demon. Returning to the tavern, she greeted Mrs. Rin, who was the new temporary employee of Ben's tavern. Serena knew Rin was from the northern tribe, but didn't understand why she chose to work at this particular tavern. Meanwhile, Iris was watching Cain, who had brought her to the market, and was clearly trying to sell her something. Cain tried to sell a treasure map with the location of the abandoned kingdom, but the merchant didn't want to give much money for it. He was interrupted from his conversations with the salesman by Mrs. Rin, who greeted Cain and said she was glad to see him. Cain didn't understand what Rin was doing here, so he decided to ask how she was doing and what brought her to this village. Rin reported that she saw the eyes of ice, that's why she ran to this village for rescue and safety. Cain decided to ask if she was talking about Lanila, the ice and snow sculptor, and if she was also in the village. Receiving a positive answer, Cain was horrified because Lanila was on his list as the most dangerous person on Earth. He recalled that when he was in the north, he could not even take a step closer to her temple because he felt fear and immediately ran away. Rin hugged him and told him that he should start hiding before it was too late. After that, Rin told him she was fine and ran away from him without explaining anything else. Cain didn't understand why Rin had done this to him and didn't even say anything about whether he had time to prepare any plan. He decided not to waste a minute, so forgetting about the merchant who was left with his map, he grabbed Iris' hand and said they should go. Once in the middle of the forest, Cain told Iris to wait for him here and not to go anywhere. Iris tried to stop him, saying that she couldn't stand in the middle of the woods completely alone and just wait for him. But Cain asked her not to worry about anything and just stand and wait for him to come back after a very important case. Meanwhile, Serena looked out the window and realized it was time to go home because it was getting dark and rain clouds were gathering. At that moment, she heard someone come inside and realized it was the Holy Guardian of Winter, Lanila. Serena knew that the 4 guardians were each responsible for a different part of the world, so she didn't understand what the Guardian of the North could be doing here. Looking at Lanila's gaze, she felt the same as when she had met Lady Seville. Serena introduced herself as the messenger of the light of peace and thanksgiving because she realized that the Keeper of the Cold knew everything and about everyone. Lanila introduced herself and said she was honored to meet a creature that had been blessed by the god of battle. Then she asked if she had seen a demon in these parts because the heroine should have sensed it as soon as she met it. Serena replied that she had only heard other people's conversations but had not personally seen or met the demon herself. Then Lanela hesitated a bit and asked if she'd seen anyone suspicious who exuded unconcealed anger. Serena tried to keep her emotions in check and said she just didn't understand her question, but Lanela continued to ask her questions. Leaving, she said that people who become driven by demons can turn the world into chaos, and such things should not be turned a blind eye. Serena realized that she urgently needed to run to Kane so that he could protect Iris from the Keeper. However, at some point she stopped, because she thought that as a heroine herself she should protect this world from demons. Iris, meanwhile, sat alone in the rain in the middle of the woods and didn't understand why Kane had left her here in this weather. She recalled that everyone who was close to her asked her to live so that they too could exist in her heart. Suddenly Lanela appeared in front of her and told her that with the power given to her by the god, she had to finish what she could not finish that day. Iris hoped that Kane would come after her and save her again, but it didn't happen, and she realized she could never forgive him. In order to protect herself from the Cold Lord, Iris began to call upon various demons to build a protective field around her. Next, she decided to exert the will of the 9 demons who had given her their consent and broke the seal, releasing Arnell's tears. Serena, returning home, saw a large pillar of fire and didn't immediately realize what was happening, but knew the Keeper could handle it. She had seen the Guardians use the cold of winter that had been given to her by the Sanctuary to subdue any evil force. To strengthen her attack, Iris combined the powers of the Fire Sinner and the Wind Demon to counter Lanela's forces. She was merging 2 great powers into one great Dracoid Valley to target the Guardian of Eternal Cold. Lanela didn't realize what was happening because the evil was enveloping her and consuming her inside the abyss. After that, Iris began to feel a sense of joy that she had been able to absorb the Cold Guardian because now she was no longer threatened. Unexpectedly, Lanela began to reappear from the Dracoid Valley where the sleeping dragon lived. Iris couldn't believe her eyes because she thought it was impossible for anyone to leave this place. Calling Blizzard, Lanela said that God's will is spread everywhere and there is no place where she would not work. Iris was attacked and fell into the stable. She realized she could not lose this battle because she wanted to avenge those she cared about. As she left the stables, she suddenly saw Kane in front of her and didn't understand what he was doing here because he had left her alone in the woods. Kane didn't understand what she was doing in the barn since he'd left her as bait to get away from Lanela. Seeing Iris's eyes, he realized that she was a demon, which meant that Lanela had not actually come for him, but probably for her. Then he remembered that he had found Iris on the Royal Road, which meant there was a good chance that she was the demon everyone was looking for. Kane realized that if everyone found out he was helping the demon, he would automatically become a target for all the heroes. His thoughts were interrupted by Serena asking him if he knew who Iris was. Kane said he'd only recently realized it, but she was their family, so they had to protect her. At some point, Serena realized that he was right, even though their loss in such a battle was inevitable. Taking the sword in her hands, she said she couldn't go on living if she knew she hadn't saved her family. Meanwhile, Iris ran through the woods and cried because she realized that Kane had found out and seen her true nature. She wanted to run as far away as possible, but realized she had absolutely nowhere to go. Her thoughts were interrupted by Lanela, who said that it was God's will and evil must disappear under the cold. Iris decided not to resist any longer because she thought that Lanela was probably right and that was the right thing to do. To everyone's surprise, Serena stood in front of Iris and said she wouldn't let even the Guardian of Winter destroy her family. Lanela looked at Serena in surprise and asked if she was sure of her choice, because there would be no mercy. Serena replied that she understood, but Iris was her family and she wouldn't allow a member of her family to be offended. Lanela said she understood her, and since it was her sincere choice, justice would be very harsh on her. Serena realized that before her was the most difficult and powerful opponent, so she decided to confront the 4 pillars of the swordsman's path. Lanela was very powerful, so she effortlessly stopped Serena's sword and blocked attacks with her bare hands. Iris couldn't believe her eyes that Serena was single-handedly resisting Lanela. Watching Serena's actions, Iris realized that she was most likely the divine swordswoman. Serena realized that their battle had been going on for a long time, but she never got a chance to attack. Lanela wanted to end it all faster and cast the Winter Silence spell as a blessing from God. Iris was familiar with this spell and realized that Serena might be in danger, so she tried to warn her. All around Serena, everything began to be covered in permafrost and she could feel the coldness that went through her. She realized that this spell could control permafrost 0 and change the temperature at which everything turned to ice. Serena realized that Lenalive had a limit because compared to Seville, she was vastly inferior in her power. Applying the blade flame swordsmanship technique, Serena said she didn't even feel the cold. However, Lanela was able to block this blow as well, saying that such a sinner had no right to enter the sacred land promised by the war. A multitude of ice spears lined up around Serena, and began to wound her, causing her pain and suffering. Iris watched their battle and realized that it had all started because of her, which meant she had to accept her true nature and help Serena. Serena decided to use the last form of red flame and put all the power she had into a counterattack. She realized that her body was having a hard time keeping up, but really hoped it was enough to win. In addition, her sword broke, but she saw the light that came from Lanila and realized she had lost to her. Lanila used Holy Spirit Radiance, and this spell could be resisted by absolutely no one. Realizing that Serena was about to be taken from her life, Iris summoned all the demons she knew and read all the spells given to her. She wished to go beyond her limits, even realizing that the demonic force could consume her herself. Iris was no longer afraid of anything and was ready for any outcome, so she summoned Arkburnell's demonic spear. She began to feel very bad, realizing that this was the limit of her strength and abilities, but wanted to save Serena at all costs. Iris and Lenella's confrontation was very powerful, and Serena was thrown back against a tree by the shockwave. Iris was very sick and in terrible pain, but she was glad that Lenella was gone and the light of her glow had faded. However, when Iris looked up, she was horrified because Lenella was standing right in front of her and she didn't understand how that could be possible. She didn't understand why fate didn't give her any chance to live, because it wasn't her fault that she was born in vice. Iris saw Lenala reaching out her hand to her, filling her with coldness, and didn't understand why she was so eager to see Cain one last time. In that second, she actually saw Cain, who was flying towards the Cold Guardian from the side of her back. When he was alone in the stables, he wondered whether he should just run away or join the battle. He really wanted to see what was going on there, so he climbed to the highest point where he could get a good view. Cain watched the battle from the rooftop and tried to think of something that could defeat Lenila. Realizing that the spear hadn't worked to its full potential and Serena had absolutely no strength left and the sword was broken, Cain realized he should have just run. However, while trying to escape, he stepped on a plank that worked as a springboard and threw him off. Calculating his full trajectory, Cain couldn't believe he'd be right in the epicenter of the confrontation. He didn't understand why things were always going wrong with him, and realized that he would have to use the Night Shadow technique just to survive. Lenila used a snow cloud to block his surprise attack, and Cain decided to use dark sky magic to counter it. She stabbed at him, and it was hard for him to contain the pain because his previous wounds had not yet had time to heal. Trying to put some distance between himself and Lenila, he cast the spell of the second form of Blessing of the Night, after which he used the Dark Cloud technique and struck the Guardian of Winter with concentrated energy. For her was familiar with this technique because he had applied the martial art technique of the Dark Order, who was the opponent of the Temple of Winter. Also, Cain realized his body was very tired, and his left arm was completely disobeying him, but knew it was a way to survive. He was glad he was able to apply the first stage of his plan to stand his ground until he was at a distance from her. Seeing Iris in agony, he realized it was time to move on to the main part of his plan. Iris screamed at him that he couldn't save her from the demonic power that was clouding her mind. A dark force hovered around her and tried to instill in her mind a real darkness that was going to take everyone with it. Cain looked at her and told her that she must triumph over the evil that was trying to take her over. She screamed at him that she was a real demon and could hurt him and his life at any moment, but Cain said he understood that. Kneeling before her, he said that he didn't care whether she was a demon or an angel. The main thing was that she was a human being and a member of his family. Lenila, listening to their dialogue, said that sympathy cannot silence evil, and only the punishment of heaven can do that. He didn't understand why the Priestess of Winter thought this beautiful child was truly an unconcealed evil. Lenella replied that he knew everything without her, because her red eyes reflected her demonic soul. Cain understood Lenella's position, so he placed a wound on his palm and said that if evil was thirsty, he was willing to give that drink. Iris was very surprised and didn't understand why Cain would dare to do such a thing and why he was willing to bring himself to her to quench her thirst. Iris didn't understand why he wanted to save her so badly, because she was the very real Demon King and the embodiment of evil. Kene replied that just because she had a bad temper was no excuse, so he recommended that she get over it and move on with her life. Iris was glad that he accepted her for who she was, so she took a sip and immediately began to regain control of her mind. To everyone's surprise, a whole crowd of villagers who were standing around them were already looking at them. Cain didn't realize when so many people had time to arrive and how long they had been standing around watching their battle. He realized it was too late to retreat, so he put his hand out in front of Iris and said he believed in this child. Suddenly, a boy named Zack ran out of the crowd and asked everyone to stop and not jump to premature conclusions. Iris looked at Zack carefully and was very surprised that he was alive and even decided to stand up for her. The crowd told Zack to go back and not to get close to the demons, because even just being near them brought trouble. The entire crowd of villagers began to accuse Iris of being the one who stole their pets, and many people died because of her. Cain analysed the situation and realised that even if they could win, they would still be in a losing position. Zack went on to say that Iris was not to blame for anything, and it was the evil wolf that was stealing and eating all the animals. Holding his head, the boy talked about how he was able to defeat the wolf, and now they had nothing more to fear in the forest. Cain looked at the boy and realized that he had chosen the path of a hero, because in secret from everyone he was able to escape into the forest and defeat the wolf. A deity came down to Zack and gave him his blessing to become a hero's journey to protect and defend him. Lynella was puzzled by everything that was happening, because the boy who had become a hero was genuinely defending the demon girl. Cain decided to take advantage of the situation and told Lynel that if she was so willing to take the evil, she could take him herself instead of Iris. Lynella approached Iris and said she was temporarily postponing the demon's trial, taking into account the sincerity of Zack, the child of God. Passing by Cain, she informed him that losing a battle with him twice already was enough for her, so she was ready to back off. Cain realized that Lynella recognized him well even in his mask, which meant she would always be able to find him on his trail. Lynella reported that winter is a preparation for a new beginning, so she will surely return when the evil awakens. Kane replied to her that the darkness would last forever in the night, so he really hoped that one day she would return to him as a friend. He realized that Lynella was a northern priestess, which meant that she would surely come back for him again to win. Cain realized that the dark warrant he was hiding from could find him that way too, but his thoughts were interrupted by Iris, who hugged him tightly. Next to Serena was Ben and some of the villagers who realized that she was unconscious and in need of treatment. Cain took Serena in his arms, and he and Iris headed towards the house to figure out what they should do next. Before leaving, he looked at the villagers again and apologized to them for all the mess that had happened in the forest. After a while, Iris noticed that the villagers looked at her differently now, so Cain decided to move. Her thoughts were interrupted by Zack, who couldn't believe that Iris had decided to leave and leave their village with Cain. Iris thanked him for not being afraid and speaking up in front of all the residents to protect her. She informed him that she remembered their argument well, and since he had won, she was ready to fulfill his every wish. Zack embarrassedly said that he had already completely forgotten about their arrangement, then told her his wish. Iris laughed and answered him that she wasn't ready to fulfill his wish because they still had 20 years to live before such a thing happened. Since Iris had left to pack and help Cain with packing, Zack was left alone and started crying because he didn't want Iris to leave. Serena was already waiting for them at the house, and Iris didn't know what lay ahead, but she knew she had a family now. Meanwhile, in Draconia, there was a guardian who could deal with anyone who disturbed the peace of the great dragon and entered the treasury. Cain was the only person who realized that the guard was enchanted by the seal of evil that compelled him to guard the treasury. So he approached him and held out his hand and said he was ready to let go of his evil and break the seal that held him inside. 30 years later, a guardian who had spent many years in hibernation awoke with the sole purpose of finding the man who remained alive. Meanwhile, Cain, Serena, and Iris have come a long way and finally reached the villain's secret hideout. When they reached the place, he said that they could stay here for a few days to rest and replenish their food and water supplies. Cain recalled that when he bought a house in the village, he had planned to stay there and lead a quiet and peaceful life, but the girls interfered with his plans. He realized that now the Dark Order and the Winter Shrines kept an eye on him, and he would only have to live on the run. Serena didn't understand what was going on, because when she regained consciousness, everything was over and no one had explained anything to her. She realized that Cain hadn't even healed his wounds, but had just packed up all of their belongings quickly enough and they were on their way. Serena noticed that Iris looked happy and not worried about anything at all. She looked at Cain and didn't understand why, if he had less than a year to live, he was willing to run around the world just because of a demon nearby. A feeling of anger filled Serena because she didn't understand what the demon was so dear to Cain. She called Iris over and told her that she looked tired, so she should probably go and rest. Iris looked at the angry look on Serena's face and realized it was better not to argue, so she decided to head inside the house. Cain realized that Serena was once again hostile toward Iris, so he decided that he should talk to her. He realized that it was very hard for Serena as a hero to relate normally to Iris's sinful child, and he didn't want them to hurt each other. Looking at Serena, he tried to explain to her that it wasn't the demon's fault that they were like this. They had just inherited it from their parents. He explained that the demons had to confront the whole world, but they couldn't survive the battle and only Iris was left. Serena held back her anger as she looked at Cain and realized that he couldn't cheat on her, and she would have to accept it. On the other hand, she was completely unwilling to accept the fact that true evil would be so close to them. Cain didn't understand what Serena was thinking, so he decided to go outside to get some air and get his thoughts in order. Serena wanted to go with him, but Cain indicated that he wanted to be alone and quiet. When he went outside, he turned the map around and started to think about what to do. Because he was being followed by two organizations, so he would have to hide. He realized that he would have to hide in the crowd and act like a regular citizen in order for him to be not so noticeable. Rising from the ground, Cain felt someone standing behind him but hiding their presence well. Then he asked his pursuer to show himself and was surprised to see a draconian guard in front of him. Cain didn't understand why she'd come after him after 30 years. Because she wasn't part of his plans at all. He realized that he had already gone through too many trials and had even abandoned his comrades just to survive. Cain couldn't stand it and shouted at the Guardian to just go away. She was just an ordinary creature who couldn't forget the past. After a moment's thought, the guard lowered her head and turned and walked back into the forest, and Cain couldn't believe he was going to see her at all. Wiping away the sweat that came out of his fear, he realized that he would have to rethink all the plans he had made. Back at home, Cain asked Serena to find a stone tree log and Iris to find weeping petals and black beetle plants. Iris noticed that Serena was getting weird with her, so she said she would go first and ran right out the door. Serena tried to control her anger, but had a hard time doing so because she didn't want Iris to hurt Cain further. Cain was glad that the girls were finally gone because he could get on with the work he'd been putting off for a long time. He started with Iris first because he realized that he would have to endlessly put a blessing on her without stopping. To begin with, he sent a mineral into the magical furnace that becomes stronger than steel when it absorbs light. Cain knew that not even blacksmiths worked with such a mineral, so he added 3 drops of the liquid substance. After adding Dravik's tears, the mineral began to soften because this substance made any metal soft and malleable. As the material became as soft as clay, Cain was able to easily mold a dragon head bracelet from the mineral. Meanwhile, Serena had used her sword and her own strength to cut down a stone tree and was surprised she had so much strength. Unfortunately, the wood had splintered and was not fit for work, and Serena realized that she had no right to blame her broken blade. Serena didn't understand why it was unfair. She had been searching for Cain for 10 years and now she had found him and lost the meaning of her existence. She understood that her only goal was to find her and be a sword hero, but now she had betrayed herself by standing up to the demon. Releasing her anger, Serena destroyed many of the trees that were around her. At some point she noticed her blade had shattered even more, and didn't understand how she could let herself destroy the symbol of her vows. Hugging the remains of the blade, Serena sat down on the ground and realized that she didn't deserve to be around Cain anymore because she had ruined everything like a beast. Meanwhile, Iris had gathered a basket full of different flowers and was lying down in the clearing admiring them. Examining the petals, she thought about the fact that after that incident in the Sena forest, Serena had grown cold and wary of her. She realized that it was most likely directly related to her demonic origins, so she wanted to lie down and clear her mind. Suddenly, Iris felt a sense of unease and realized that a red-toothed boar was standing very close to her. She didn't understand how he dared to interfere with her rest, so she summoned the demon Cyrus, who was in charge of the wind, and directed him at the boar. As soon as after the attack Iris decided to summon the fire demon for the final blow, she felt the little boars near her. They rubbed against her legs, squeaking pitifully, and it felt like they were crying and begging her for mercy. Iris looked at them and didn't realize what she had done. Because of her anger, she had attacked a beast that couldn't even speak. Iris felt that the malice and faith of Arknell, the god of fury and flame, was asking to accept his beliefs and become an archdevil. After helping the boar, she realized that this was the price of helping a demon of the Ninth Order, and she could hurt someone she cared about. Apologizing to the little boars, Iris went back out, not wanting to accept that she could now only exist as a demon king. Meanwhile, Cain continued to go about his business and heard Serena reporting that she had brought in logs of stone wood. Cain knew that stone trees weren't used as firewood, but they were a secret ingredient in metallurgy. He had this information from the legendary secret organization under Black Smoke, who wanted to take over the world with their metallurgy. However, the organization ceased to exist after Cain was hired by one of the blacksmiths to ferret out the secrets of other blacksmiths. Cain knew that when stonewood was heated to a certain degree, it produced a high-temperature heat that could melt minerals and steel. Serena watched the process and was very surprised to see the blue flame because she knew it was used for the dragon sword. She had heard the legend of the blue fire many times and was sure they were just fairy tales. However, now she had seen it with her own eyes and was even more surprised when Cain asked her to give him the sword. Continuing to marvel at this process, she dutifully handed Cain what was left of her blade. Seeing her reaction, Cain asked if she was afraid that the sword would dissolve, but she said she wasn't afraid because it was just a thing. In her heart, Serena was very upset because this blade was the only thing that connected them to each other. Cain asked her if she knew about the spiritual trance state, and Serena said she had heard about knowing the truth of the sword. Receiving the answer, he asked what determines the truth of a sword, and Serena replied that it is those feelings that make one bear the blade. Suddenly, Cain turned around and yelled at her, saying that she never could understand anything, so that's why her sword was broken. Serena was confused and didn't understand exactly what Cain meant or why he was yelling at her. Turning away, Cain said that her answer was arrogant and showed how ignorant she was and therefore not worthy of the flame's notion of battle. Serena was very upset and thought he just hadn't seen her on the battlefield, so he was saying such hurtful things to her. On the other hand, she realized that he had pointed out a mistake to her, so Serena got down on her knee and asked him to teach her a lesson. Cain didn't expect her to react that way because she actually answered his questions correctly, and he yelled at her just to stun her. Cain realized that now he had to do his best because for the Masters, the sword was a lifetime. He knew that to Serena the sword held great significance because she had walked around with it for 10 years, and it was actually very cheap. Kane realized that he needed some way to distract Serena, so he went over all the knowledge in his head to pick the best ones. To Serena's surprise, Kane began to say that almost no one knows that the trance state has 4 components. Kane explained to her that the first stage of inaction involves taking the sword form as nothing more than a mere formality or characterization. The second stage of renunciation involves freeing one's thoughts from one's material position in the world. The third stage of entering trance states completely freed thoughts and actions from any limitations. Serena listened carefully to her teacher and tried to go through each step to stop thinking about the sword and just wield it. At some point, she realized that she was just pretending to drop her sword because she really wasn't. She realized that to break her sword would mean for her to break herself, and she was willing to take that path from beginning to end. Breaking the sword, Serena began to feel physical pain and realized that she must become free of all shapes and sizes. She realized that steel is tempered through pain, which meant she had to pick herself up in pieces and steel herself with her determination. Kane was completing the hardening and thought about the fact that even though he said different words, it allowed him to buy some time. Looking at the sword, he realized that it had been created from stone wood and Dravik's tears, and when tempered, he had struck it 1,000 times. Examining the blade, he saw streaks on it and thought he hadn't quite gotten it right, or the stone wood was too hot. Looking at Serena, he didn't realize what she was doing, or how many hours she had been in this strange state already. Serena felt her breathing normalize and her body grow stronger, and she realized that most likely she had gone through a hardening. She felt that she had been able to go through the 4 stages of taking the sword and realized that no master in all of history had been able to do so. Serena saw the tower in front of her and realized that if she could pass it, she would reach Kane's level of swordsmanship. Kane looked at Serena and didn't know what to do. Since she was in a trance state, he felt he had to say something. As he thought about it, he saw Iris coming towards him with a full basket of flowers and started to pretend he was giving Serena a lesson. Once she got closer, Kane asked her if she knew the difference between witchcraft magic and demonic arts. Iris was very surprised by such a question and after thinking about it realized that she really didn't know the right answer. Kane explained to her that magic is when evil possesses you, but demonic art is the skill of wielding evil in order to use magic. He said that no demon has ever been able to deal with the devil, but those who do, they will cease to be evil. Therefore, Iris couldn't understand demonic art if she didn't understand the primal source of true, pure evil. Preparing the extract, he said that this bulbous vegetable he got from a man from a country that existed in a mythical age near the east. Iris reflected on the fact that if evil is her destiny, then understanding that evil should be her first choice. She hoped that if she could comprehend the demonic arts, she could dull the effects of dark magic. The only thing Iris didn't understand was how Kane could know about all this, because even that man's life was a myth. Meanwhile, Kane was oiling his blade and thinking about the fact that the preparations were complete because even the demon child was confused. Iris watched Kane and realized that he had used the power of charms that were only used in empires with a vast history. She was very surprised that Kane was a spellcaster and possessed charm magic, knowing the words of the old mythical language. Iris looked at him and thought about the fact that there probably wasn't anything Kane couldn't do anymore. Finishing the blade and a bracelet, Kane was very pleased that he had managed to do such a difficult job. Finally, Kane added an alloy with shape memory properties so that the products would not break and could be repaired independently. Then he gave the blade to Serena and said that his name was Guardian, and as long as her faith was alive in her heart, no evil could break it. Serena said that the sword was very beautiful, and she could feel a current of energy in it, which meant it was probably even stronger than the dragon sword. Iris Kane handed over a bracelet with a dragon seal that absorbed all evil onto itself and could free her thoughts. She was pleasantly surprised because Kane had decided to give her such a treasure, even after learning that she was a true demon, the last of her kind. Iris and Serena looked at each other and smiled for the first time in such a long time, realizing that they wanted to be on the same side with Kane. Kane knew that he had placed spells on their wares that would not allow them to harm him under any circumstances. He realized that he could have made a good living making such items, but his life was much more important than money. At night in his dream, Kane realized that he had traveled back in time and realized that this was not the first time for him at all. Once again holding the spell card in his hands, he realized that he had made a really wise decision. He saw that the person next to him was going to leave the team because he was afraid of the monster they were going to boo to. Kane realized that the man he was talking to was the same old man in the present from whom he had bought the house and was looking for a map of Draconia. After all, it was in his youth that this man was able to find Draconia and become the possessors of unique artifacts that allowed him to earn a name. Kane realized that it was that day that the man's resignation had led him to a quiet life in the woodshed, but for the rest of his life he'd been waiting to be able to put things back together. He knew he'd given him the right advice then, and 30 years later he didn't regret that decision. Craig realized that he had been able to keep himself alive because of Kane's advice, but he didn't understand why Kane had returned to Draconia. Kane knew his answer wouldn't have been understood anyway, so he decided to pause and not declare his true intentions. Craig smiled and said that he realized that it didn't concern him at all since he had made the decision to resign anyway. Kane was grateful for Craig's understanding and reticence, so he wished him luck in his future life. When he woke up, Kane was puzzled because he realized that he was very tired because of these dreams that haunted him. He realized that he was already 50 years old and his body and joints no longer worked as well as they used to when he was much younger. Kane realized that the only thing he wanted to do was run away without anyone looking for him, but first he needed to regain his strength. Serena couldn't sleep either, and wondered where Kane might have gone so early, considering his health. Realizing that Iris was still asleep, Serena decided to go into the field and practice with her new sword to understand its powers. While training, she realized that the Red Flame version wasn't perfect because it didn't include all the basic 3 directions of swordsmanship. Serena felt that the Red Flame was not perfect and tried to perfect this technique, but her body would not obey her. She realized that it was because she still felt anger towards Iris because she was darkness. Walking back, Serena was very surprised that Iris was playing with a baby boar and didn't understand what he was doing here. She realized that most likely the boar's mother could be somewhere nearby, which meant Iris was in danger. On the other hand, Serena realized that a normal boar wouldn't be able to pose any danger to a demon like Iris. Looking at her hand, she realized that her body was reacting and wanting to protect Iris, and she didn't understand why things were like this. Iris saw Serena and said that the boar cub was not afraid of her at all, and she didn't feel any danger from it. She asked Serena where Khan was because he had left a note and she thought they had left together. However, Serena didn't know where he could be either. Their conversation was interrupted by a boar who asked Iris to go with him, and she asked Serena if she could follow him. Serena realized she had nothing to worry about, but she wanted to make sure Iris was safe, so she decided to go along with her. Iris was very embarrassed by this decision because she was sure that Serena was very angry with her and didn't trust her anymore. Serena looked at the boar and realized she felt no malice from him, but there were too many people in her path from whom she expected no malice. As she walked, she remembered Kurtu, who was the strongest of all the 99 demons, and it was difficult for her to defeat her in battle. Remembering this, Serena realized that she was filled with dread even after so many years, because she couldn't pick up a sword for 2 weeks. She realized that she had managed to win that time by a miracle, and she wasn't sure she could do it again. Serena recalled that she didn't sense any malice from Kurt until the very end, so she decided not to relax. Finishing walking, Serena was very surprised that the boar had led them to a natural silver hot spring. She knew that mostly thermal springs were located in the eastern regions, so she was surprised to see it here. Iris told Serena that they needed to leave because, judging by the bubbling water, this spring was under the influence of Arknell, who was an archidemon. Serena couldn't contain her laughter and told Iris that they didn't have to leave because there was a regular hot spring in front of them. She thanked the baby boar because she realized it was a true gift for their skin and recuperation. Iris was very surprised, especially from Serena suggesting that she go and take a dip in the hot spring right now. Meanwhile, Kane was very frustrated because he realized that he had taken the wrong road and reached the cliff of the mountain. Looking at the cliff, he wondered what he should do now, for the path to the hot spring he was looking for was simply gone. He realized that most of the hot springs were in the east because that was where Arknell dwelt. Kane was frustrated because he realized that it was at the hot spring that herbs grew that could help him recover quickly. He was very sorry and decided to look for a safer way, but a ferocious boar formed in his way. Kane realized he was trapped because there was a cliff behind him and a boar in front, but he didn't have his sword with him. Seeing that the boar was ready to attack and completely oblivious to the cliff, Kane began to run along the cliff to escape. Then he decided to strike the boar with the night shadow, but to his surprise, the boar continued to stand on its feet. Kane then decided to trick him and push him off the mountain by jumping in front of him at the very last moment. But the boar had managed to wrap its tail around his leg and pull him down the cliff, and Kane didn't know what to do. During the fall, he grabbed a branch, but it began to crack due to the weight and they continued to plummet downward. Meanwhile, Serena was at the hot spring and she really enjoyed it because the water soothed her and relieved her tension. Serena looked at Iris and saw that she was all in her own thoughts, probably because she couldn't recognize the hot spring right away. She asked her if she liked being in the hot spring because it was relaxing and energizing, and Iris said yes, she liked it. Iris wondered why Serena wasn't uncomfortable, and she explained that she used to live in the dorms and sleep in tents. Iris admitted that she used to be convinced that all humans were adversaries, and she had no other choice since birth. But with Kane and Serena, she was able to relax in the company of people and realize that there could be kind ones among them. So Iris decided to confess that she was very happy when Kane and Serena agreed to become her family. She found happiness and peace. Serena looked at her and realized she couldn't turn away from someone who could be so genuinely and innocently happy. She wanted to apologize to Iris for blaming her for all her troubles, without admitting that she was to blame. But she was interrupted by a strange sound she heard from above, and realized that large chunks of mountain were flying at them. Grabbing Iris by the arm, Serena told her to get up immediately because they needed to get to a safe distance. Serena took Iris in her arms and ran as hard as she could, trying to dodge the large pieces of the mountain that were rapidly falling into the water. Seeing the barricade of rocks in front of them, she knew they had no way out, but she asked Iris to hold on tight because she was confident in her abilities. Jumping right over the wreckage, Serena was able to find a way out, and looking around realized that it seemed to be over and they were safe now. Seeing that Iris was shivering from the cold, Serena quickly found her things and said they'd better get home so they wouldn't get sick. At one point she sensed danger from something that had fallen from the mountain and asked Iris to move away to a safe distance. Serena couldn't find her sword and realized that it was probably left under the rubble, but she didn't have time to look for it because she saw a boar. She realized that engaging in battle with her bare hands wouldn't be effective, but behind her back was Iris and she had to protect her. When she struck the boar, she felt a strong pain in her arm and realized that it was not an ordinary forest boar, but a real demon. Serena didn't understand what a demon could be doing in these parts, but she decided to attack it before it had a chance to fully recover. Iris saw that the water was starting to turn into shards and yelled to Serena to at least give her some warning about it. After being wounded, Serena was surprised even more because she realized that the boar could control water and demons. Serena saw that the boar had directed many magic rays towards Iris and immediately ran towards her to protect her. Serena didn't understand why it had gotten so quiet and saw that Iris had put up a protective magical shield around them. Serena was very surprised because only 9 wizards could do magic without casting spells. Looking at Iris, Serena realized that in front of her was not an ordinary demon, but the Lord of all demons, namely the Demon King. Iris saw that Serena had a broken wrist and a deep gash on her side, but she still protected her no matter what. She realized that now it was her turn to protect Serena from her adversaries, and summoned Sinus the Wind Lord. Throwing back the boar with winds of faith, Iris felt a severe dryness in her throat, and Serena began to worry about her condition. However, to their surprise, the boar stood up again and began to attack them, and Iris realized that he was as overpowered as she was. Iris realized that Serena had better run, but if the two of them had too much mana, Serena would be in great danger. Serena didn't understand why Iris had asked her to run away, and what was even going on, and most importantly why the boar was still alive. Iris said she couldn't explain everything to her, so she asked her to just run and get Kane as soon as possible. Serena didn't want to back down because she realized she wasn't ready to leave her family member with her opponents one-on-one. Realizing that Iris wasn't happy about her decision, Serena said that Kane had taught her to never back down if the family was in danger. Serena reported that even without a sword in her hands, she was still very strong and would not be a burden to Iris on the battlefield. She saw that the demonic boar's onslaught had begun to destroy the magical shield, which meant she had to prepare for a confrontation. She realized that once the shield shattered, she and Iris would have a hard time and hoped to find her new sword in the battle. Suddenly, to everyone, Serena's sword was right in her hands and she looked around not realizing how that was possible. Then they saw Kane in front of them and were very happy about it, because with his help they will definitely have a chance to win. Kane realized that villains always had a special relationship with rocks because they were like a last-minute escape aid for them. He realized that he had managed to survive the fall from the cliff but felt very bad because of the large number of fractures. Kane realized that he was still a third-class villain who lived with a hero and a demon. As he regained consciousness, he saw the Draconia Guardian in front of him again and didn't understand why she was still following him. Taking her hand and leaning it against his heart, he explained that he was still alive, and therefore she would not be able to do anything to him at such a moment. Kane realized that the guards had spent 1,000 years guarding the treasure of dragons who weren't even alive, which meant they weren't interested in living souls. He asked the guard to prove the anger he had 30 years ago and take his life or just leave and not bother him anymore. The Guardian sighed, realizing that she was unable to do so, so she simply turned around and walked off again deep into the forest. Kane looked at her and saw a red-coloured flower not far from him, used to quickly heal difficult wounds. Reaching for it, he remembered that it was one of the reasons he was here in the first place and decided to use it. Kane knew that this flower was used unpurified to make the strongest poison of the dragon's tears, but it had medicinal properties as well. When he swallowed this flower, he began to feel terrible pain, but clenched his teeth and was determined to overcome it by all means. Kane knew he was about to pass out from the pain, but all his senses sharpened, and he began to enjoy the sweet smell of the air. At some point he heard the sounds of battle, and realized that he should do some calculations to figure out what might have been going on there. Looking around carefully, he realized that he was ready to find a way out and saw Serena's sword in front of him, so he headed for it. After doing the calculations, he threw the sword towards Serena, and ordered her to grab it because he realized he had found a way to survive this time as well. Cain saw that the boar had gotten bigger and realized that it had a knack for storing demonic energy while cooling in a hot spring. He realized that when the rock collapsed, it formed a crack in the ground and the demonic power seeped into the source. Cain could see that Serena and Iris were completely desperate. However, his life was not like theirs, so he didn't want to give up. He asked them if they trusted him, and they said yes. Then he smiled and asked them to rely on him. Cain realized that the boar was a demon, but unlike the demons that had survived for 1,000 years, he was only an animal. He smiled at the boar and said that in front of him stood not a simple man, but a real villain who was able to stay alive in worse situations. Cain called the boar to him and realized that he had time left to rid his mind of the framework of restraining consciousness. He knew that quick thinking and instant assessment of a situation combined with multi-analysis increased abilities several-fold. Cain said that even the biggest storm begins with the flap of a small butterfly's wing and a long journey with a step. Iris immediately realized what he was trying to say, so she began to summon the demon Sinus, unsealing him. She realized that storm was wind magic and butterfly wings were the lowest rank spells and couldn't believe it would work on a boar. Iris began to feel ill again and found it hard to breathe because of the magic she had used. Cain looked at the boar that had started to stand up again and realized he had made a mistake in his calculations. After a little thought, he said that a stone never returns and raindrops know the earth as long as they fly on the wind. Serena felt that such deep words were hard enough to understand, but knew that he was confident that she could understand him. Iris realized that Cain wanted them to fill the boar with so much magic that it simply couldn't handle. She realized that this could hurt Serena, but she decided to trust Cain completely, so she activated her demonic power. She was getting sick, but the bracelet on her arm began to absorb her mana, and she realized that she really did have a treasure on her arm. After watching the bracelet work, Iris realized that it could control the power of Arcanes and Sinus, who were the strongest demons. She realized that thanks to the effects of this bracelet, she no longer had to worry about side effects. Iris looked at Cain and didn't understand how a human could create a treasure as strong as a divine skill. Serena was very surprised because she was sure she wouldn't be able to participate in the battle with an injury in her arm. Cain suddenly said that the wall was collapsing, starting with a small crack, and the cloud that had dissipated would return in the form of raindrops. Serena immediately realized what he meant by his profound words and prepared for a final attack. It seemed incredible to her that Cain was talking about what the demon boar was just planning to do, as if he could read his mind. Looking at Cain, she realized that his cryptic metaphors were much easier and quicker to understand than long explanations. At some point she began to wonder how this was possible, since these skills were possessed by a draconian guardian, if legend was to be believed. Serena knew that according to legend, there was a single key among swordsmen that opened the door to another world and expanded the knowledge of senses and perception. When Cain asked her to step back, Serena realized that he was applying foresight to achieve the skill of prophecy. Cain knew it was all a sham because he could only use the Eye of Truth for a few moments while the flower's power worked. Watching the demonic boar, he realized that he lacked the talent to reach such truths on his own. Cain didn't care for him. It was all about calculating possible failures based on the experience he'd gained over such a varied life. Realizing that the boar's evil could not come out in any way, he took out his pendant and said that he would take his anger for himself. So thanks to the third dragon treasure, Cain was able to create a core with unstoppable magic that filled the boar. He realized that now everything happening around him was completely unimportant, and if he couldn't defeat his opponent, he should absorb his powers. Cain tried to use boar magic and the action of the flower whose juice he drank to create a cellular mutation. Serena watched his actions and didn't understand how this was even possible, especially with such multiple and serious wounds. She knew that the only way to heal so quickly was to sell her soul to the devil and eat the hearts of others. But Cain didn't do anything like that, so Serena couldn't understand how he was able to restore himself and his strength like that. Seeing that his wounds were beginning to heal, Cain was very glad that he had managed to properly filter the magic he had received from the boar. As he looked at the boar, he realized that at such a short distance he could take its life without even using magic. But the boar was restrained and couldn't move, so Cain shouted at him to come closer and prove he was truly evil. Looking into Cain's eyes, the demonic boar was very much frightened, so he turned around and ran away swiftly. Seeing this reaction, Cain began to laugh because he realized that he had so often had to manipulate different animals just to survive. Suddenly, he began to feel very bad and realized that he had used too much truth sight and therefore should be punished. Seeing that Cain was falling to the ground completely exhausted, Iris and Serena ran to him to assess his condition and render aid. The Guardian of Draconia, meanwhile, stood on the mountain and watched everything going on to understand her own feelings. She remembered how 30 years ago when she opened her eyes and saw a man who was covered in wounds and digging a hole for himself. She knew that for the first time since she had gotten the key, she had seen a lock in a man's heart that was too difficult to open with a small key. Kane then asked her why all the people lost their lives and if it was because they decided to get treasure that didn't even exist. The Guardian remembered that he could not give him an answer, for all his comrades who had gone with him had betrayed him. She remembered him coming up to her and saying he was leaving because he had no desire to be stuck in Draconia with a beast that had no regrets. Wiping away her tears, Kane said that they would definitely meet again, but only when she left the place guarded for 1,000 years. He asked her when she regained her long-lost anger to find him and show him that her anger was far stronger than his own anger. The guard remembered that he was the only man who had come to Draconia not for treasure, but to free her. Sometime later, the butler was running through the streets at night trying to find the potions master's house. At some point he managed to find the potions master's house, which was more like a regular slum. He couldn't expect much at the sight of such a poor house, but realised he had no turning back, so he knocked on it and asked to be let in. He asked to be let in because his master was in critical condition, but the other side replied that they don't work at night. Desperate, realising that this was his only chance of escape, the butler began begging to be let in. When the door did open, he was very surprised to be illuminated by the bright and warm light coming from the girl. Serena smiled politely and motioned for the butler to go inside and tell her everything so as not to wake the rest of the town. Iris had gone to the Lubazel market in the Luban Principality in the morning to purchase the products that Kane had asked her for. She walked through the market in men's clothes and noticed that it was too noisy because something had probably happened. Shopping for supplies and vegetables for the table, she thought about how 10 days ago they had arrived in Lubazel under the guise of a potionist and his students. Thanks to Kane's special seals and his potions, no one has ever been able to locate them, and they even managed to find an empty house in the slums. Iris thought for a long time about who Kane really was, because he had a sword and could work as a steelworker and was even a warlock. She was very curious about how Kane lived his life and how he had managed to master so many skills and abilities and excel in them. On the way, she saw the vendor berating the guest in the red robe and asking her to make amends for breaking one of his vases. The mistress thought it was only fair that she should have been paid for the property damage, but she had absolutely no local money. She said she might later send someone from her staff to pay for the inconvenience caused to the vendor for the broken vessel. The salesman said he couldn't just take the lady in red at her word, and the whole nation had already descended on their conflict. Iris watched what was happening and realised that the merchant was actually at fault himself because he had left the vessel outside. She decided to intervene, realising that for Mistress it was not her mother tongue, and she said that it was not about language but about attitude. The merchant explained that the lady had said she would send the funds later, but he didn't understand why he should just take it on faith. Mistress started to get very angry when she realised that the merchant was probably trying to accuse her of lying in front of everyone. Iris, seeing the traveller angry, said that there was no guarantee that the lady was telling the truth, so the merchant hesitated. Then Mistress turned to Iris, thinking it was a boy, and asked why he was allowing himself to jump to so many conclusions. Iris watched her and realised that she had amazing charisma and an overpowering voice that mesmerised her. After a little thought, Iris replied that no one at the market knew anything about the mistress, so they couldn't trust her words. After that answer, the mistress calmed down and admitted that they really had no reason to trust her. So she took the red robe off her shoulders with a slight movement of her hand and said she could keep it as a guarantee of her words. All who watched the conflict were dazzled by the richness and beauty of the jewellery that was around the girl's neck and in her ears. The merchant was very puzzled, and taking the gold-embroidered robe from the lady, said that it would be enough to compensate. Then Mistress turned to Iris and asked the insolent boy his name, but Iris replied that before asking his name, he should give his own. Mistress smiled and said that the clever boy was indeed right, so she would like to know his name the next time they met. Iris looked after her mistress and realised she had never met her before, but she seemed very familiar in speech and demeanour. Meanwhile, Serena was giving first aid to visitors, and the little girl who was with her father was speaking nursing instructions. She handed her a small pouch of plants that she recommended her father give him when the pain was unbearable. Serena warned that too much potion should not be taken because it could be dangerous, and the girl listened to her carefully. Smiling, she said that her dad would be fine, just that he needed at least a week to lie down and not injure his leg. The girl was very grateful for the help and for the advice on the care and treatment of her father, who had become very ill while working hard. Serena said she shouldn't thank her so much because it was just her job, so she would have helped anyway. The girl apologised to Serena because she didn't have much money to pay her for her work. Serena was very generous and kind, so she only took one coin and said it would be enough. The girl was worried because she realised she had to pay for the medicine, and Serena stroked her head, saying that the medicine was inexpensive. It was already very difficult for Serena to accept payment for her work, but she realised that it was the only income they had. She was very sad because she realised that they were helping poor people, so they were spending more than earning. On the way back, Serena saw Iris and called her Aaron so as not to attract the attention of the locals because they were dressed as men. Seren and Aaron decided to go home together, and Iris thought about whether to tell about what had happened at the market. Meanwhile, Cain was thinking about how he couldn't go to the temple like everyone else to get his wounds treated because he was a villain. It was for this reason that he had to learn how to treat all his wounds on his own, so it wasn't hard for him to pretend to be a potionist. Cain planned to sell potions to the rich and poisons to various travellers and hunters because his garden contained expensive plants. However, the boar trampled all over his garden, so a quick buck from them could not happen to run on. He was very sad about it, because they even had to live in a poor house and repair it with their own resources, so he wanted to find a way out. His thoughts were interrupted by Serena and Iris reporting back home and ready to continue their assignments. Cain realised that if he lived alone, he could meet a good retirement, but because of these girls, he had squandered all his savings. Even more frustrating for him was that Iris had never learned to cook well, and all they could afford was boiled vegetable soup. Cain was eating his soup thinking that he just had to find a way to improve his current situation. His meal was interrupted by a heavy knock on the door of the butler who asked to be let in, even though it was already night. Serena looked at Cain hoping that he would give his consent for an exception to open the door and provide assistance. Cain realised that such visitors could bring nothing good except accusations later that they just didn't have time to save someone. Without getting approval, Serena reported that they are closed and are not willing to make exceptions for any visitors. Hearing from the butler that his master was in a very serious condition, Cain was immediately interested, realising that they could make money. Serena didn't understand why Cain had changed his mind and asked to open the door to let the servant in to hear what had happened. Cain was anticipating a big profit and thought that even if he couldn't cure him, he would at least pretend to work hard. Serena opened the door and kindly asked Mr. Servant to come inside to find out exactly what had happened. Cain examined the arriving man and realised from his clothes that the job must be lucrative, so he asked him to tell him what had happened. The guest said that it happened a few days ago, and his master had been sleeping a lot since he fainted. Serena asked if they had gone to a priest, and the guest said they had, but the gentleman was no better. The servant replied with grief that his master was getting worse, and the priest said he could no longer help him, so he was looking for a potionist. He explained that his lord could only be helped by a potion that couldn't be brewed by a priest, so he went all over the capital. Continuing his story, he added that he had approached many potion makers, but all of them only grinned, saying that such a potion simply did not exist. Serena realised that the lord had a complicated illness because spirit power could heal wounds and abrasions and minor illnesses. She didn't understand how to do the right thing for them, because she could only treat simple illnesses. So Serena looked at Cain and began to hope that most likely he might have known how to help that gentleman. Cain thought that the description fit the sacred god fragrance disease well, but it was created by a secret organisation and it was not easy to cure. He realised that if it was really a rare poison, he could make a lot of money if he could find an antidote. So he turned to Seren and asked her to get ready to pay a home visit to Mr. Guest. He asked Aaron to stay home and look after the household during their absence. The guest was very excited and couldn't believe the potionist would be so quick to agree to a home visit before scheduling a treatment. As she left, Serena looked at Iris and informed her that their visit would be a long one, so she asked her to be careful and lock the door. Closing the doors, Iris realised that they would probably not be back until morning, and hoped that Cain would be able to help the Lord. However, her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and Iris was very surprised that another patient had come in at this hour. Iris didn't know what she should do and whether she should open the door, because she didn't know how to treat people at all. However, when she heard the voice of the man on the other side of the door, she realised that he was very familiar to her, and she had heard him at the market today. When she opened the door, she realised that her senses had not failed her, for behind the door was the very lady who had broken the merchant's vessel that morning. Mistress was as surprised as she was that the boy was in this house and she didn't understand what he was doing here. The guest entered the house and sat down at the table, and looking around the dwelling said that it looked very modest indeed. Mistress looked at the boy and did not understand why he was standing and looking at her with such a frown, because he should have at least offered her tea. Iris became angry and said she was not obliged to serve a man who had entered her home uninvited. Suddenly, Mistress pulled out a mirror and asked to be shown the location of whoever she was looking for at the moment. Iris was very surprised because Mistress had a treasure search map in her hands. Having received the answer, the lady was again very surprised because she realised that she had again made a mistake with her search and had come to the wrong address. Iris realised that Cain or Serena was most likely the object of Mistress's search since Mistress had come to this very house. So she decided to ask who exactly she was looking for, and Mistress realised that she really could have just asked the boy. Iris was very tense when Mistress informed her that she was on the lookout for Mistress Lavelle. Watching her guest's reaction, Iris realised that she was just testing her, so she tried to behave as usual so as not to arouse suspicion. The guest said she was injured on one of her journeys and Mrs. Lavelle gave her help, which is why she is looking for her. Iris, still angry, decided to ask who this mistress was and what she needed Serena for. The lady was very surprised at the lack of hospitality and said that she was looking for her sister, so she was asking about her. Tasting the herbal tea Iris had given her, the lady was pleasantly surprised that such a cheap tea had such a pleasant taste. Also sitting down at the table, Iris said that if the lady had finished her tea, she would like to hear what she had come to this city for. Mistress replied that she had only managed to take one sip, but agreed to tell everything because she had promised to do so. At first, Iris said that according to Serena, she was the only child in the family, and also never said she had a sister. Taking a sip of tea, Mistress said she was ready to admit that she and Serena were indeed not related sisters. She went on to say that she and Serena were once very close together, and went through a great deal of adversity shoulder to shoulder. Iris didn't understand at all what Mistress was talking about, and the latter added that Mistress Lavelle had never said anything about having a weak sister. Then Iris agreed that there might actually be logic in it so that no one could use that information against Serena. However, Iris was very surprised that Mistress said she was very grateful that Serena had a family to take care of. Mistress recalled that the first time they met, Serena had been very prickly as a needle, but could wound herself like that. She realized that Lady Lavelle had a great responsibility and was trying to become stronger in order to revive her family. Iris thought about it and realized that Serena had indeed had to live a life full of challenges in order to revive her family. Mistress smiled because she realized that now Lady Lavelle had those who could lift the burden from her, so she was grateful. Iris looked at Mistress and realized that she couldn't find the words because Mistress was really worried about Serena. Glancing at her watch, Mistress asked how soon Serena would be back since it was getting late and it was getting dark. Since Iris didn't know that, Mistress sighed and said that she simply had no choice but to spend the night in this house. Iris was horrified and did not understand why the Mistress had chosen to spend the night in this poor and ruined house. Mistress admitted that she had spent a great deal of time and effort searching for Serena, so she had completely missed finding a place to sleep. Iris realized that Mistress was right because if she was Serena's sister, she couldn't just let her go in the middle of the night. Meanwhile, Kane, along with Serena, reached their destination to examine the patient and see if they could help him. At one point, Serena stopped because she realized she had been in this house before, and more than once when she was little. She didn't want to be recognized, so she pulled her headdress over her eyes and proceeded inside the house. Kane was very surprised that they were placed in the living room of the house and asked to wait for the butler, but he continued to look around the house, realizing that it was rich. Serena watched Kane carefully and wondered if they would be able to help and heal the homeowner. After a little while, a butler came into the room and started yelling very loudly, asking if they were really potions masters. Kane looked at the butler and realized that it would be wrong for them to ignore it, because then they would have their papers checked, and since they were hiding, he didn't want to let that happen, so he said that he didn't say that he could cure his master. The butler began to get even angrier, and said that they shouldn't even try to trick him in Mr. Trave's house. At some point, Kane realized that they were in the Trave family home, and it was up to him to heal the head of the family. Serena tried to smooth things over and explain that they couldn't be sure of their success until they saw the patient themselves. But the butler wouldn't calm down and shouted that if they just wanted to sell worthless potions, they should leave the house. Kane said he never thought the venerable Trave family would be so rude to guests and disrespectful. The butler became even angrier, and Kane was ready to leave the house to avoid helping such a rude man. However, to everyone's surprise, Serena called Mr. Butler jailer, and he didn't understand how she knew his name. Then Serena stood up and took off her cap, and Kane was very surprised that Serena was familiar with such a wealthy Trave family. Butler Jallow was very surprised to see Miss Lavelle, whom he hadn't seen in a long time, and Kane thought he should have taken Iris. The butler didn't understand how Miss Serena was here and wanted to report it to the master immediately, but she asked him to stop. Serena said she was undercover in the city, so she asked that her presence be kept under wrap. Then she pointed at Kane and said that they had come together to assist and heal the Trave family's master. Jailer immediately began bowing to the potions master and apologizing for his rudeness and indecent behavior. Kane accepted his apology and informed him that nothing terrible had happened, and he would like to see the patient already. The butler immediately escorted them to the Lord Master's chambers and invited them inside, saying that they were already expected. Kane asked her to hand over his bag of medication and wait outside for Serena to lock the door and not let anyone in. He then began to examine Hale Trave to make sure that the initial diagnosis was correct. After confirming that these were indeed the symptoms of the sleeping god scent, Kane began to prepare an antidote from the 12 ingredients. He realized that he had a great responsibility, because if the proportions were out of proportion during manufacture, terrible damage could be done. After all the preparations, Kane lifted Hale's head and gave him a drink of the freshly prepared antidote. On regaining consciousness, Hale Trave immediately recognized before him Kane Ronald Shieldren, who had become temporarily his healer. Realizing that he was recognized even after a 10-year hiatus, Kane greeted the Great Palace swordsman. Hale Trave was called a walking fortress because he spent 2 days alone defending the fortress against 100 opponents during a battle. Hale informed Kane that he was grateful to him for fixing him and would be indebted to him, but admitted that he was pretty tired right now. Cain replied that it would make him feel better to consider that this treatment would be payment for his debts while they were palace swordsmen. Hale replied that he wasn't ready to agree with him because he couldn't give Cain what he should have given years ago. Cain remembered how 10 years ago he'd revealed his secrets and techniques to Hale in exchange for something he was supposed to manufacture but never did. He realizes that he would very much like to get the product he asked for. This could save his life, and maybe even several times. Halisa said he had time to make the thing, but couldn't keep it near him, so he hid it in the safest place possible. Cain realized that his actions were quite logical, because if he carried the treasure with him everywhere, he could cause trouble. He decided to clarify exactly where the safe place where the treasure was kept was. However, Hale just wished him luck and fell asleep, which really pissed off Cain, who wanted his treasure. Cain was very angry because he realized that the safest place was well protected from evil and he himself was the villain. So he decided to ask if he could pick him up himself, but Hale turned away and said it was getting too noisy and he wanted to sleep. Cain sighed because he realized that Hale, knowing who he was and about his villainy, still welcomed him into his home and even told him about the treasure. Meanwhile, Serena dutifully guarded the entrance to Hale's chambers to ensure that no one would interfere with Cain's treatment. She realized that he was under the influence of the scent of the sleeping god because it was the reason her grandparents had lost their lives. In that regard, Serena was certain that someone purposefully wanted to take Hale Trave's life and didn't understand who could have done it. Her thoughts were interrupted by approaching footsteps, and she didn't know who it could be, for she had asked the butler not to let anyone in. Looking up, she was very surprised to see her fiancé, Evan Trave, who was the grandson of a palace swordsman. The swordsmith families of the House of Levail and Trevar had great arrangements, and to strengthen the relationship, there was an arrangement for the engagement of the descendants of these families. However, as Serena travelled to revive her family's relevance, the adults' arrangements simply faded away. Evan bought Serena tea, and she thought about the fact that he was so good with a sword that he had become a master by only 20 years old. Evan reminded Serena that they hadn't seen each other in 15 years, and thanked Serena for coming to his family's aid. After a little thought, Serena turned to Evan because she realised he knew his grandfather's medical history. Evan didn't understand how she knew, and Serena said that if they were being honest, they were looking for an antidote and not the usual cure for the disease. Sighing, Evan said he couldn't talk about it, but if Ms. Lavallee would keep it a secret, he was willing to tell her the whole truth. Serena took her strongest sword swear and swore with her sword that she would be sure to keep everything a secret from the others. Evan said that when the civil battle ended, his grandfather tried to make all the connections so that he could prevent all sorts of battles. To that end, he turned to the lords to hire informants who had reported suspicious activity not too long ago. The Prince of the Kingdom sent Hayton to check everything, and Grandfather got into the secret organisation, but when he came back, he lost consciousness. That's why Evan and his family members were so desperate for a cure to find out from his grandfather exactly who he met in the secret organisation. Serena listened attentively to Evan and thought about how his story didn't add up because his grandfather was a very strong swordsman. She realised that she couldn't even stand up to Hale herself because he was able to achieve super strength and become a walking fortress. So she couldn't understand how such a professional and strong man could have suffered such damage to his health. Evan answered that he didn't know everything, and the only thing he could find out was that this secret organisation had existed a long time ago. He said that according to his intelligence, this organisation is hunting for a treasure that they plan to present to the prince at the ball tomorrow. Evan said that they'd beefed up security, but he realised that it couldn't be a guarantee, so he asked Serena to go to the ball with him. Serena was embarrassed and very surprised at this invitation because she realised that he was inviting her as a soldier. Evan explained that he had a great desire to strike a surprise blow against the secret organisation and to do it as stealthily as possible. Serena understood Evan because she was an excellent swordsman and it would be easy enough for a girl to get into the royal ball. She thought about it, because at the moment they were in hiding and it would be strange to go to the royal reception, but she couldn't refuse Evan. Thinking that if she didn't go, the secret organisation could hurt Traver's healer, Serena agreed to go if her identity was hidden. In the meantime, Iris had started to wake up and was surprised that she was very warm because the heating was not due yet. However, when she opened her eyes fully, she was very frightened and didn't understand why there was a mistress in her bed who called herself Serena's sister. At this, Mistress replied quite calmly that she was very cold at night, so she decided to warm herself against her. After the lady added that of course young Aaron was not as warm as Mr. Levill, but quite warming too. Iris was very scared, especially since she realised that it was morning and Cain and Serena had not returned. Mistress said she couldn't wait for Lady Leviel any longer because she had a very important event today. Iris under Aaron's outfit exhaled because she realised she wouldn't have to put up with such a strange mistress anymore. However, it was at that moment that the mistress turned and smiling sweetly asked if Aaron had any desire to go out with her. After half a day, Iris, undercover as the boy Aaron, realized that she was already very tired of following Serena Leviel's sister mistress. She was very tired and couldn't even believe that it had only been half a day and she was already so tired because Mistress had gone into all the stores. Mistress didn't understand why the boy was so tired and thought he was just sick with something, but Iris decided to ask why she wasn't tired. The lady reported that she eats only expensive and high-quality food and has been working out for the last 20 years to keep fit. Iris found this answer very strange, so she decided to ask if she was a swordswoman, but she said she was not familiar with the technique. Then Iris said she didn't understand why she was training so hard, and Mistress said she was only doing it all for beauty. Fixing her hair, Mistress said she was doing it all to maintain her exceptionally outstanding looks. Hearing this, Iris began to feel uncomfortable and had the feeling that she had lost a Mistress in this conversation. The Mistress then headed towards the next house and asked Aaron to gather his feet in his hands and follow her. Once inside, Iris realized that they were back at the tailor's house they had already been to this morning, and she didn't understand why they had come here again. To Iris's surprise, Mistress approached the seamstress and informed her that the boy who had come with her was a little shy, so it had to be done quickly. The seamstress smiled very sweetly and told Aaron which way was the dressing room where he could change. There were already 2 assistants behind Iris who were already asking her not to feel awkward because they were professionals at their job. Iris was a little frightened because she didn't understand what was going on and why she was being led to change clothes. After a small amount of time, the seamstress informed Mistress that they were all set and had completed their entire task. Looking at herself in the mirror, Iris was surprised to see that she was wearing a beautiful dress and her hair was loose. Then she thought about the fact that most likely Mistress had guessed that Iris was only pretending to be the boy Aaron. Iris couldn't take her eyes off of her because she didn't understand why she was dressed so beautifully and why she had changed her clothes. Unexpectedly, the Mistress said that she was incredibly sorry, but her heart was already occupied by another chosen one, so she could not reciprocate. Iris was completely unaware of what was going on and informed that she had no plans to even think about taking a place in Mistress's heart. After a little thought, the lady handed the seamstress a platinum seal and said she was willing to pay the amount she wanted to receive. Iris was very surprised because that this seal was more expensive than 36 treasures because you could spend any amount of money. She understood that the seal form belonged to the Cassandra family, which was the richest family of this continent. Iris's thoughts were interrupted by the mistress who asked if they had a carriage ready for the trip, and the seamstress replied that the carriage was already waiting outside. She didn't understand where they were planning to go, so she tried to find out this information from the mistress, probably of Cassandra's family. However, Mistress replied that Aaron would find out as soon as they arrived at the appointed place, so she asked that they just keep quiet during the trip. Iris didn't understand why she'd agreed to all this, but she was getting very curious about how it might end. Arriving at their destination and leaving the carriage, Iris was very puzzled when she saw the palace in front of her and realized they had arrived at the ball. However, Mistress ignored the fact that Aaron was in a dress and continued to address her as a man, saying that they had arrived. Suddenly, the lady of Cassandra's family began to put on a mask on her face, which seemed very strange to Iris, and she asked if they were going to the masquerade ball. Mistress reported that this is only because she is not very pleased when a lot of people start recognizing her and demanding her attention. Iris felt very awkward when she entered the castle and didn't understand why she didn't put on the mask too, because she was ashamed of what was happening. The 2 invited men were very unhappy with the behavior of the ladies who did not agree to go to the dance with them. Iris heard them talking and realized they were talking about the bride of the grandson of the strongest swordsman of Trave, and decided to see who she was. Looking carefully through the crowd, Iris was very eager to see who Sir Evan's fiancée was. However, her surprise was unparalleled when she saw the familiar blue earrings and Serena in a beautiful dress. Serena felt very uncomfortable in the dress because it restrained her movements, and she would have been more comfortable in the armor. She realized that in order for no one to know or suspect anything, she just needed to dress appropriately. Glancing at the door where Cain was, she knew she shouldn't do anything without his permission, but she didn't want him to find out about Evan. Serena was able to get ready for the ball while Cain was busy treating a sick man, and was glad she was able to find a dress in the right size for her. When Sir Evan saw Serena in her dress, he was confused for a while and couldn't say a word. Serena looked at him carefully and didn't understand why he was silent, thinking she had probably done something wrong and upset him. Coming to his senses a little, Evan bowed and asked Miss Serena Lever's permission to accompany her during the ball. Of course, she accepted his invitation as chaperone, and together they went to the carriage that was already waiting at the entrance of the house. During the ride, Serena thought about the honoured guests being in the front courtyard, where they would be protected by royal knights. She realised that the main difficulties would arise at the beginning of the ball, because there wouldn't be enough guards inside to protect the invitees. Serena's thoughts were interrupted by Evan, who decided to ask her if she remembered what had happened 15 years ago. Evan reminded her that it had been 15 years ago that they had first met and had started talking and spending time together more often. Serena remembered everything, but she was very uncomfortable with the conversation. Then Evan asked her if she remembered how often he'd been sick as a child. Getting a positive answer, Evan reminded her that she had told him that in order to get stronger one must constantly train with a sword. He said that it was after her words that he first picked up a sword and was able to become Grand Master of the Royal Order. Serena was surprised because the Traves were not a dynasty of swordsmen, and she had always thought it was his grandfather who had inspired him to take the path of a swordsman. Suddenly Evan said he wanted to formally ask Ms. Serena Levale to marry him and become his wife. Serena was very confused and didn't know how to let him know that she had already found the man she wanted to spend the rest of her life with. To her rescue, the coachman stopped the carriage and informed the young gentleman that they had arrived and could get out. Evan smiled at Serena and said she could give her answer another time. Then they left the carriage and headed for the palace. At the palace, Evan asked Serena to wait for him for a few minutes while he went and checked security. As soon as Serena was left alone, she was immediately approached by Edward Hilton, who really wanted to get her permission to dance. Trying not to arouse suspicion, Serena replied that she wasn't feeling well today, so she wouldn't be able to dance, and apologized. When the gentleman left, Serena realized that she should get lost in the crowd somewhere, where she wouldn't be seen and would be unnoticeable. Looking around for a better position, Serena was very surprised to see Iris and didn't realize what she was doing at the ball. Her thoughts were interrupted by the butler, who asked all the guests to get ready because the Prince of Luban was going to come out to them. Serena, like all the dignitaries present, bowed her head in respect to the prince. Iris didn't know what to do since she wanted to talk to Serena to see what was going on, but Mistress grabbed her arm and pulled her to her. All guests were told at this point that this ball is in honor of the end of the year, so all guests can just relax and unwind. Iris asked Mistress if she knew Serena was going to be here, and Mistress said maybe yes and maybe no. Serena was even more confused when she realized that Iris was with a mistress from her distant past. Mistress, seeing Serena's look, winked at her and presented a finger to her mouth, showing a sign of silence and calm. Serena was gripped with fear as she tried her best to remain calm, but now she was ready to break. This was because she realized that if the mistress came here with Iris and knew who she really was, then only destruction awaited them. Iris had absolutely no idea what was going on or how she should behave with Mistress and Serena. Madame was looking at the stage carefully because she saw that a representative of the Rast family was going up there along with the casket. Opening the box, he said that he had the last mysterious legacy of the dark organization Book of Evil. Meanwhile, the butler of the Traves' house was examining the new candidate for servant to the family, which was the disguised Cain. The disguised Cain reported that he is a marked servant and knows all the history and traditions of the families of the Empire. Gerald continued the interview by clarifying whether the candidate really speaks 8 languages as stated in the letter of recommendation. Technically, Cain knew 35 languages, but that might have aroused undue suspicion, so he specified 8 and said he was well trained. The butler said it was all wonderful, and asked the new servant to escort all the guests of the Traves' house to Leander's palace for the end-of-year ball. Cain was very glad that his cover and disguise had worked perfectly, so he started to get ready for the ball. In his heart, Cain was angry because if it wasn't for the old man, he wouldn't have to pose as a servant. All of this was due to the fact that Hale had hidden the treasure in the main corridor of Leander's palace and could not go there himself for health reasons. Cain didn't understand how a treasure created for a villain could be hidden in the main corridor of a palace with many guards. He didn't understand how he could go to the palace and, upon learning that there would be a ball there, realize that he could go as a servant. After a bit of thought, Hale realized that it was a good idea and he could send him to the castle as a servant, so he offered to make a pact. Cain realized that he was inside the castle, but to get to the main corridor he had to get into the ballroom and he didn't know how to do it. He heard Sir Evan at the entrance refusing to let a servant of the Lord of the Ross family pass and decided to come closer. The head of the family, Rost, said he understood that his guard couldn't go inside with him, but didn't understand why he had to carry his own things. Then Evan decided to attach a servant to the head of the Rost family to carry things, and the Lord agreed because of the respect for his grandfather Hale Trave. Cain couldn't believe his luck when he was asked to be the escort of the head of the Growth family to the ballroom. Once inside, the head of the family turned to the servant and told him that he had a very valuable thing in his hands and he should be very careful not to lose it. Cain was a little surprised, but bowed to the Lord and assured him that he would protect this treasure at the cost of his own safety. He thought about the fact that there was some kind of statue inside and was very surprised when he started to follow his master straight to the stage. Looking around the ballroom, Cain could finally see the corridor he needed and began to think about how exactly to get there. Cain wanted to just hand the gift to the prince and leave, but walking past the guests he couldn't believe it when he saw Iris. Seeing a girl with blonde hair not far from Iris, he thought it was Serena and didn't understand how that was possible. At this moment, Pirate Rost ran up to the prince and said that he was honoured to be present at this ball, so he had prepared a gift. Pirate reported that he had managed to get hold of an incredible treasure that he would like to present to the Prince of Luban. He reported that this treasure was hidden in the ruins of a very evil organization that once plunged the world into a state of chaos. The prince was very curious as to what exactly the treasure could be in front of him, since it was found in the ruins of a secret evil organization. Cain was very surprised because he realized that this treasure was not the treasure of the Free Knights, and therefore it belonged to the demon kingdom. Opening the treasure box, Cain couldn't believe that all this time he had the greatest treasure of all, the Book of Evil, in his hands. Many people present fainted because they realized that the dark organization was the only one who managed to conquer the entire world. Suddenly, Cain heard a very familiar voice among the crowd and started looking at faces until he stopped his gaze on the masked lady. At that moment, the lady of Cassandra's clan emerged from the crowd and asked the Prince of Luban to give her such an interesting Book of Evil. Mr. Rost was indignant with rage and did not understand who she was or how she dared to speak to His Highness the Prince of Luban. Mistress reported that she simply forgot about her mask and calmly took it off while looking at the Prince and Lord of the Rost family. Pirate Rost was furious and spoke of how the mistress's charms did not give her the right to speak in such a manner in the presence of all to the Prince. Mistress replied that she did indeed have a delightful charm, but was not at all accustomed to relying on it. Aroth of Luban descended and bowed before the ruler of the 28 lands and 7 seas, the only lady Great Empress. The lady smiled and said that she realized that her imperial power was enough to ask for such a thing from the Prince of Luban. Pirate Rost was so frightened that he insulted the Grand Empress that he even fainted from surprise. The prince answered that all that he had by right belonged to the Great Empress, so she could do as she saw fit and right. The Lady Empress said that as a token of his loyalty, she was releasing his state from offerings to the Empire. Watching what was happening, Cain realized that this was exceptional. However, the Book of Evil could really be worth such a thing. The Empress announced that the uninvited guests were now leaving, and everyone else could continue to enjoy the evening. She said she had come uninvited and planned to spend the rest of the evening reading, so hopefully no one would interrupt her in that. Then she turned to the servant and asked him to take the book and follow her, which scared Cain very much. Serena approached Iris and asked her if she was all right and why she had come to the ball in the company of Her Majesty the Empress. Iris realized that long ago the main problem of her kingdom was the emperor who ruled 2/3 of the continent. She informed Serena that last night this mistress came looking for her on the chase map. Iris thought to herself that perhaps Mistress wasn't looking for Serena. Given her awareness, she should have known who she was living with. Then she handed Serena a package her mistress had asked her to give her that said she would wait for her. After reading the message from the roll-up, Serena apologized to Iris and informed her that she needed to step away for a while. On the way to the Empress' chambers, Serena didn't understand why the mistress they were close to as sisters had travelled such a long way. The knights guarding the Empress's chambers would not let Serena Leviel pass until she showed them a letter from her mistress. Then they opened the doors of the chambers and announced that Miss Serena could come inside for a chat. The Lady Grand Empress was looking out into the street from her balcony, and a servant stood beside her with a treasure. Serena looked at Mistress and didn't understand her look, because she had never seen her so bossy before. She bowed to the lady ruler of the swordsman houses and introduced herself as Serena Level, a loyal servant of the Empire. Cain, continuing to hold the treasure box in silence, was horrified by everything that was happening and didn't understand how Serena knew the Empress. Mistress sighed and looked at Serena and asked her if she had to say all of this, to which Serena replied that she had done everything by the book. The Empress said that Lady Serena is partly right, but she must not forget that she is an Empress for whom no law is an edict. Cain knew that the Empress did not obey laws, and this was her first decree when she came to the throne. The Empress was only 10 years old when she issued her first edict and wreaked havoc around the world. However, no one in the Empire dared to argue with her decrees, because no one had ever before possessed the power that the Great Empress had. Mistress informed her that such seriousness adds to Serena's charm, so she will turn a blind eye to her impoliteness. Cain was very surprised because no one was allowed to talk to the mistress like that, which meant there was more to him and Serena than that. Afterward, the lady said that she had heard the wonderful news that the Swordsman of the Sky and the Swordsman of the Earth were betrothed and asked if it was true. Cain had absolutely no idea what they were talking about and was very surprised to learn that Serena Leviel was engaged. Mistress reported that at first she didn't understand why Serena and her protege Evan wanted to get married, but then realized it was to build an alliance. Serena was horrified and didn't understand how she could tell her mistress that it was all just a rumor because she gave her absolutely no opportunity to respond. Pointing to the treasure box of the Book of Evil, Mrs. Empress said she wanted to give it as a gift for her and Evan's wedding. Cain couldn't believe that the Empress was planning to give the most valuable of the 30 treasures to Serena for her wedding. Serena replied that it was too expensive a gift, but Mistress replied that there was no need for formalities since they were like sisters. The madam then went on to say that after the ceremony she herself would look after the demon girl, and under her protection she would no longer have to hide. Serena didn't know what to do since Iris really didn't have to hide, and with the help of the book, Kane could be cured. She wanted to object, but saw the Empress's gaze that did not tolerate disobedience, and realized that she could not change anything. Serena realized that she had no choice but to comply, so she thanked Mistress for her generosity and such a valuable gift. Mistress replied that she was pleased that Lady Serena liked her gift and informed her that she was free to leave. Serena realized this was her last chance to object, but couldn't because the Empress herself wanted her to. Looking at the servant, the Empress said that Serena was charming, and the servant replied that he could not say anything because he was a commoner. Kane was very happy with his answer because he realized that he was undercover and he just had to leave, and that was it. Much to his surprise, Mistress said she thought he only kept Serena to himself because he thought she was nice enough. Kane was very scared because he realized that if the Grand Empress was saying that, then she knew who was living with Serena. Mistress smiled and said that she thought that Servant Kane Ronald also found Lady Serena Lavelle very nice. Kane was very surprised and didn't understand how Madame Grand Empress was able to recognize him because he had tried so hard. She replied that few servants were familiar with the traditional etiquette of the Empire, including even the Imperials themselves. Kane realized that Imperial etiquette wasn't just about manners, but complete control over his body posture and his actions. Mistress added that she recognized his face even though it had been 20 years. He only had a few more wrinkles. She sighed at the fact that it had been 20 years since she had started looking for him after his disappearance in all sorts of different ways. Mistress said he had no idea what she had to go through to find him after 20 years. Kane was very upset because he was trying to hide, and now she has found him and knows everything about his whereabouts and current life. He plucked up his courage and decided to ask why she needed to actively seek out a mere butler, since he had only taken a couple of paintings. The mistress replied that he himself had taught her politics and management, and had also prevented 113 assaults, which is not peculiar to a butler. She also added that the Empire threw all its resources and struggled to find him only after 20 years. Kane felt himself starting to get very anxious, but tried to pull himself together and not show his fear. So he thanked Mistress for her generosity, but Mistress replied that she couldn't just forgive him for running away without permission. The Empress asked him not to worry, saying that she wasn't going to charge him huge compensation or sentence him to imprisonment. Kane was trying very hard to keep his composure and keep his body and movements under control, so he gathered himself and asked what she wanted from him. The mistress offered him to become her retainer, and then he would no longer have to bow down to anyone and live in luxury. She also added that he didn't have to worry about the demoness because she would take her under her protection, and the priests wouldn't be able to do anything. Kane realized that the Grand Empress probably had a plan, but he couldn't understand what it was. He asked if he could think about it, and Mistress replied that she had waited 22 years, so she was willing to wait some more. Kane bowed to his mistress and said he had to go and think about her offer. He was sure he had a chance to escape, but Mistress said she would expect an answer from him tonight. The Empress added that she didn't want to harm the demoness or take Ms. Leviel's life, so she asked him to be more prudent and not run away. After leaving the palace, Iris began to wonder what Madame Empress wanted, and if that treasure was really the great and rare Book of Evil. At some point, Iris realized that she had been holding back and not using magic for a long time. However, Sevith was the most knowledgeable demon and would know about it. So Iris decided to hide somewhere and summon the demon, but her thoughts were interrupted by the conversation of two men who were discussing Serena. The men were discussing that the Celestial Swordsman along with Sir Evan were a beautiful couple, especially when entering the hall together. Iris thought it was all nonsense because Serena could never leave them because of some engagement to a swordsman. Finding a more secluded spot, Iris realized that this was where she could call on Savita to figure out what was going on. However, out of the castle came Serena, who was in tears, and Iris asked her why she was crying and what had happened. Iris was very angry and pressed Serena to tell her who had hurt her and made her shed tears. Serena decided to tell her the truth and said that ever since they were kids, their families had an agreement to marry Evan. Iris didn't understand why Serena couldn't just give it all up and live with them like she used to. Serena said that she was invited by the Empress and told that if they consummate the marriage, she would protect Kane and Iris. Iris didn't understand why Serena was doing all this for them and asked her not to agree since she didn't want to marry Evan. Serena replied that her personal wishes were no longer important, as the Empress had decided everything for everyone, and she could not disobey her. Iris lowered her head and asked Serena if she loved Kane Ronald, who taught her how to hold a sword. Serena was very puzzled by her question and was simply at a loss for words because she didn't know what to answer or say. Iris explained that even she could see that Serena had a completely different view of Kane and was afraid to admit it to herself. Serena started to think back and realized that Iris was absolutely right, which was why she hadn't confessed to Kane that she was going to the prom with Evan. Iris couldn't contain her emotions any longer and began to scream, not understanding why Serena was willing to leave Kane. Suddenly, Serena starts saying that she's a hero and can't be family to a demon, and was only playing family in the first place because Kane wanted her to. So she asked her to forget Iris about her and live happily ever after because she wasn't as kind and righteous as it seemed. Iris realized that Serena was being so rude on purpose not to hurt her, but she didn't want to live happily ever after without her herself. She realized that her dream family of Serena and Kane was hers, and she couldn't understand how the Empress could do this to them. Left alone, Serena thought that it was probably for the best and Iris could live happily ever after if he forgot her. Suddenly, Kane started walking up to her, and she couldn't understand why now, and asked him not to approach her because she couldn't be with him. But he held out his hand to her, asking her to straighten up and look him in the eye, then asked Serena to dance. During the dance, Kane asked Serena to relax and let herself go with the flow despite any obstacles. Serena looked at Kane and didn't understand why he had come now, and at this very moment when her world was completely shattered. Kane had walked out after his conversation with that mistress a few minutes ago, and didn't understand what he should do now in this situation. He realized that the Empress had her eye on him, and he would not be able to just run away, and he could not take the treasure. Suddenly, he sensed that there was someone else here, and realized that the Empress soldiers were watching him closely. He saw Serena at the fountain and didn't understand what she was doing here, but since she was loyal to the Empress, she wouldn't let him just leave. He realized that each of them didn't even have a sword and hoped she had noticed the guard's presence as well. Realizing they were surrounded, he asked Serena to trust him and head back to Her Majesty the Empress. Serena realized that it wasn't enough for her to know that Kane was just happy, and she wanted her to be the one to make him happy. Kane realized that now the guards would follow Serena and he would be safe for a while. However, after looking around, Kane realized that he was still surrounded, which meant that he wouldn't be able to escape this time. Meanwhile, Iris arrived at the Empress's chambers with the help of her magic and flew up to her balcony. The Empress immediately greeted the Demon Queen, Aetheris, and asked what brought her to the chambers at such a time. Iris realized she had made a big mistake not recognizing her opponents by sight and asked why she called herself Serena's sister. After receiving a favorable response, Iris asked the Empress to revoke her decree because Serena doesn't want it at all. The Empress said she thought Evan was a good man, because not many people stay faithful to one woman for 15 years. Iris didn't understand why the Grand Empress was so insistent on setting Serena up with the swordsman Evan. The Empress replied that she wanted to do so and that the reasons were not important to her at all. Iris was very angry, not understanding why the Empress was forcing Serena to go against her choice just because of her status. The Empress replied that she did not care about religion and titles, and would always get what she wanted by any means because she could do anything. Iris thought it was ridiculous and talked about how as a ruler she should protect the people and be on their side. The Empress said that it is not part of her rights and duties, she just wants to rule, and since she is recognized she will do what she wants. She added that if she doesn't like her management and her decisions, then she can overthrow her because it is her right. Iris did not understand how such a thing was possible, because when she ruled the kingdom she did everything for the good of her people and not for herself. She didn't know what to do because her mistress had said that it was because of her misrule that she no longer had a kingdom. Meanwhile, Kane was hiding among the trees and didn't understand why there were so many assassins in the kingdom who wanted to find him. He realized that he needed to find the knights who should dutifully protect an ordinary servant. After failing to meet some knights and realizing he had no weapons, he decided to set at least traps for his own safety. Having finished setting the traps, Kane stepped out of the shadows and showed the assassins that he was running away from them so that they would run after him and fall into the trap. Seeing that the assassins were trapped, Kane wanted to relax but saw a blade fly by him. Dodging, he fell to the ground and realized that one of the assassins had escaped the trap after all and was standing right in front of him. As he ran away, he thought about who it could be since the skill was used clumsily, but it was definitely a shadow cut. Kane realized that if it was an assassin from the Eternal Rest, he wouldn't be able to stand against him, especially without a weapon. So sneaking into the castle, he took the two blades that were at the statues of the knights to confront the enemy. However, to his surprise, there were two opponents and he realized that he was surrounded on two sides. So he had to apply swordsmanship techniques and be more focused to take the lives of two opponents at once. Walking towards the main corridor of the castle, he thought that something was wrong because the assassin's technique was not clear and not quite right. Taking the shield from the wall, Kane thought the hall was too quiet and it seemed very strange to him. Meanwhile, Serena stood by the garden and thought about Kane, hoping that he really could do everything himself and she wouldn't have to go against her wishes. Suddenly, Evan came up to her and asked her why she was in such a great mood and if she was admiring the garden. Then he decided to ask where exactly she was going to see her off, and Serena replied that she was going to the Empress. Evan replied that he was glad she was in a good mood and said he would be happy to escort her to Her Majesty the Grand Empress. Serena followed him and thought about how to tell him that she didn't want to get married because it wouldn't affect the families because the engagement hadn't happened yet. Her thoughts were interrupted by Evan, who thought it very strange that there were no royal knights in the hall because they couldn't just leave their post. Seeing the lifeless bodies ahead, Serena also thought it was very strange because the knights were strictly following orders. At some point, Evan and Serena realized that this could most likely be a planned assassination attempt on the Empress and ran to her chambers. Meanwhile, Iris was talking to Mistress and didn't understand what was going on because a whip suddenly flew past her. Whiplash quickly and clearly attacked the assassin who had snuck into the Empress's chambers, and Iris was surprised she hadn't used a sword. Around Iris and Mistress there appeared to be a great many assassins who had appeared from outside, and she didn't understand how they had passed unnoticed. After assessing the situation, the Grand Empress calmly said that now she would finally be able to play and gathered the whip in her hand. Iris was very much surprised at this calmness of the Mistress and her power, because there were so many opponents. After attacking several opponents, the Mistress asked Iris why she was so surprised because she was the Empress and should be able to defend herself. Iris still couldn't understand why a whip and not a sword and decided not to think about what defied common sense. Afterward, Mistress asked Iris to move farther away so as not to interfere with her warming up and playing a game with her opponents. Iris turned around and started to walk away because she didn't plan on helping the Empress, but she was interested to see how she handled them. Mistress, clearly assessing the situation, considered her opponents and dealt damage to each of them with her red whip. One of the opponents managed to grab her whip and he started pulling it in his direction so that the Empress would lose her balance. However, the Empress uttered some words and the entire whip instantly began to be covered in fire. Iris, who was watching, was very surprised because only some people could speak the language of enchantment. The Empress winked at Iris, realizing that she had been exposed, and asked the Demon Lord not to dig so deep into the secrets of the Empire. Their conversation was interrupted by a shout from Serena and Evan, who burst into the Empress chambers and began assessing the situation immediately. One of the opponents immediately started to attack Serena, but since she didn't have her sword with her, she just tried to evade the attack. Seeing this, Evan ordered Serena to duck so he could buy time and protect her from her opponents. Evan asked Serena to go to the Empress and told her that he could handle the two opponents himself. Serena saw that there was only one opponent left next to the Empress, so she pulled out her hidden dagger and attacked him. However, much to Serena's surprise, her opponent was able to dodge her attack, and she realized that these were no ordinary opponents. In confronting her opponent, Serena realized that he was very strong and mastered various swordsmanship techniques. Looking at the movements of the techniques and tactics of the enemy, Serena began to think that most likely he was a descendant of the Shadow of Eternal Rest. Serena realized that the assassins of the Shadow of Eternal Rest were elite soldiers who wielded the shadow strikes. They were very strong. Realizing that she didn't even have her sword with her, Serena remembered that as a swordsman of the Empire, it was her duty to protect the Grand Empress. Serena saw that two opponents were already heading towards her, and she didn't know what to do because a dagger wouldn't be enough. Suddenly, the opponents were attacked, and Serena turned around and realized that she had been assisted by Iris. Finished with the confrontation, Evan headed over to the others and asked if they were okay. The only surviving assassin escaped by jumping off the balcony and fled in a direction unknown to all. Serena analysed the situation and realised that there was something wrong here with the assassins from Shadow of Eternal Rest and the failed assassination attempt. She asked the Empress if she was okay, and the Empress replied that she was only okay because of Iris and Serena. Even offered to escort everyone to a safer place, and the Empress, walking behind, thought it was all ridiculous. Smiling, the Empress said she realised that Sir Evan had hired the assassins, so she thought he could have planned it better. Evan started to smile and, trying to be restrained, asked why the Empress was saying such strange things. The Empress replied that it was strange that the royal guards had not yet arrived, and Evan said he had sent them to reinforce the guards around the palace. The Empress asked how the assassins could have gotten into her chambers with such a guard outside, and Evan replied that they probably had help from inside. The Empress then said she didn't understand where the knights who were guarding her were, and Evan replied that they had been stripped of their lives by the assassins. Iris realised that if all the royal knights couldn't stop the assassins, then Evan was right and they had someone helping them inside the palace. The lady looked at Evan carefully and said that only someone who had influence in the palace could have done it, so she suspected him. Evan replied that he was the grandson of a court swordsman who couldn't possibly be on the path of plotting against the Empress, so he wasn't involved. The Empress calmly replied that he was probably just trying because their losing would be a great accomplishment for him. Iris thought about the situation and remembered that the assassins did not really use poison, but as if they were waiting for Evan to come. Evan replied that he couldn't have thought it all out, because he didn't even know the Empress was coming to the ball, and she replied that his goal was the Book of Evil. The mistress went on to say that this was probably the way it was intended, so that he could show that he had defeated the assassins and become the new hero. Evan said he didn't understand why there was so much suspicion against him, and the mistress replied that it was because he had poisoned Sir Hale Trave. The Empress said that he poisoned his grandfather to take advantage of his emotional convictions and thereby avert all suspicion from himself. Evan started yelling that he was completely innocent in all of this, and Lady Serena could back up his words. However, Serena pointed her blade at him because she knew she trusted her mistress' words and was convinced she was right. Evan started to smile and didn't understand what Serena was doing and why she chose to question her fiancé's honesty. Serena replied that she trusted the Grand Empress and informed Sir Evan that their engagement should be forgotten. Much to everyone's surprise, Sir Evan started laughing loudly, and there was no way he could stop doing it. Evan replied that he had no way of knowing that his plan would be so screwed up, and if the Empress hadn't shown up at the ball, no one would have known. So he displayed several small blades that were filled with poison and released them towards the girls. Serena immediately began to counter his actions and asked the Grand Empress to step back to avoid being hit. Serena didn't realize what was happening, but her body was completely unresponsive, and she was resistant to most poisons. Evan said that it was the breath of night which was the strongest poison, and admitted that it was his true secret skill. Evan went on to show them the Dark Swordsman's blade of betrayal and said he had trained in it for a long time. The Dark Swordsman was the most cunning and evil because he never spared poison for his opponents and defeated many knights. Serena didn't understand what he was doing all this for, and Evan said he was never accepted as a swordsman, thinking it was only to his grandfather's credit. She tried to counteract such poison in some way, but she couldn't do anything, so she said it was all wrong. Evan replied that he was doing it all to be recognized for his achievements and to accept all his hard work in order to be proud next to her. Pulling out his sword, Evan said he realized that now that she knew everything, he would have to keep her like a caged bird. Serena was very nervous because she realized that her body was completely out of control and she was completely unable to move. Evan stepped closer to her and raised his sword, saying it was time for her to rest, because when she woke up it would all be over. Serena could only close her eyes because she realized there was absolutely nothing she could do about the situation. Suddenly she heard footsteps and saw Cain walking calmly, not looking at the poison vapors hanging in the air. A few minutes before, Cain had been standing there watching everything happen, thinking about what to do in such a situation. The Empress only confirmed Cain's thoughts because he immediately realized that it was Evan who had hurt Hales. Cain realized that he probably shouldn't interfere despite the Empress' position, but then he would be considered an assassin. However, when Evan pointed his sword at Serena, Cain realized he had absolutely no choice and decided to intervene. Iris, Serena and the Empress were very happy that Cain had come to their rescue, which meant they had a chance to win. Cain looked at Evan and thought about how he could know him and how he could properly counter his hidden secret technique. He informed Evan that the caged bird would not belong to the owner of the cage and would be looking for a way to escape. Evan replied that it didn't matter anymore, and if Serena was in his cage, she would only look at him and sing only for him. Cain didn't understand how Hales could have raised such a monster and why Evan had become such a horrible person in the first place. He decided to clarify what Evan wanted to be a hero for then, and Evan answered to spread his wings and fly with Serena. Cain laughed at his remarks and informed him that wings would never help make a bat into a bird. Evan started to get angry and talked about how if his plan hadn't been thwarted, he could have been a hero, and Serena would have loved him. Cain answered him that he would never be a hero, and instead of wings, he should have stood on his feet and gone and been content with what he had from the outside. He came closer and said that in order to be a hero, you have to go through hardships and move forward step by step despite the pain. Evan was even angrier because he realized he didn't want to listen to Cain and believe his words, so he decided to attack him with poison blades. He yelled that Cain didn't know anything about him, so he had no right to talk as if he could see right through him. Cain noticed that Evan's movements were calculating shadow punching and other techniques of the shadow of eternal rest. He shifted his weight to his supporting leg and straightened his back to strike him with the shield Hale had made. Evan couldn't withstand such damage, so he was thrown to the other end of the corridor by a great mighty force. Serena marveled at Cain's focus on applying fundamental basic techniques combined with full body control. She realized that he was the epitome of perfect productivity because he could block any wasted use of force. Evan didn't understand how this could have happened, and after gathering his thoughts, he attacked the enemy again. Seeing the multitudes of poisonous blades, Cain closed his eyes and began to empty himself, imagining that nothing around him simply didn't exist. There was no thought or emotion in his head, and heaven and earth were simply absent, which helped him block all the blades. Serena watched him and realized that his moves were the simplest that could be found in any shield manual. Evan was furious and didn't understand how the opponent was able to use Iron Spirit, because even he couldn't do it. Cain only looked at him silently and continued to remain completely calm and peaceful. Serena realized that Iron Spirit was Hailtrev's secret skill that helped him become a court swordsman. However, she didn't understand how Cain could master a secret skill that was man-made, and so it was difficult for her to assess the situation. Cain replied to Evan that just because he couldn't master the Iron Spirit technique didn't mean no one else could. Serena continued to not understand because sword skills, unlike the spiritual trance state, belong to the realm of the senses. Cain thought that only those who had spent their lives doing evil could reach the sanctuary of evil that was under the control of the devil himself. So he replied that in order to let the Iron Spirit in, he emptied himself completely of all desires and thoughts. Serena looked at Cain and realized that his gaze was bottomless despair, and she couldn't understand what he had gone through to become like that. Evan didn't understand how such a thing could be possible, because a man can't give up everything and fill himself with emptiness. Cain looked at him and realized that his head was occupied with love, honor, pride, swordsmanship, so he couldn't empty himself. Evan started attacking again, and Cain thought about how it was all just a copy, because he was actually using the Iron Spirit shield. At one point, Cain displayed the Sword of Battle Flame and said that since Evan couldn't get rid of his evil, he would take it away. As Evan was kneeling, Cain asked him for an answer as to who taught him the Hidden Blade technique and helped him create an exact copy of the Book of Evil. Evan looked at Serena and said that his teacher was to be feared because he had a lot of power and a lot of knowledge. Bowing his head, he asked for protection for his teacher from the Dark Sword, then said nothing more. When Cain heard about the Dark Sword organization, he started laughing hard because he realized he now had a new target. He realized he had waited too long for this, and now he finally had another chance to change things. In the morning, Cain went to see the Empress and informed her that he was sorry, but had to decline her offer. The Empress didn't understand how he could refuse to live in luxury and enjoy all the benefits of an entire empire. Cain replied that he didn't need any more of it now, and even the ground would become a cage for the bird. The Empress wanted to force him, but Cain asked not to be angry with her humble servant, but to understand his intentions and let him go. She replied that she was only letting him go as a remembrance of the past, and reminded him that the Empire would always keep an eye on his movements and actions. Cain thanked her, and thought about the fact that he had found a lead, which meant that now absolutely no one could get in his way. He remembered how decades ago the Empress had thought about how to make sure he married Cain Ronald. She said she would surely grow up to be a fine lady and take the lives of all opponents who would allow themselves to come between them. Mistress remembered what Cain had always told her about eating right and training her mind and body. Her thoughts were interrupted by Iris, who had entered her chambers to understand why the Grand Empress had decided to stay. To Iris's surprise, the Empress replied that she would like to visit the Tower of Truth, for there are wise men who know everything about everything. The Empress said that in order to create a successful nation, a language and symbols must first be invented, and so the dragon language was born. She explained that through sorcery one could only borrow powers from the dragons who could decide the fate of all mankind. Iris began to doubt that the power of sorcery could be the solution to the fate of an entire nation or the entire world. The Empress replied that sorcery can do this, for it nourishes the power of all who use the language and the alphabet. Iris began to realize that the energy of the people was stored in the language they spoke, which they used in sorcery. The Empress explained that sorcery was stolen from the Empire, and everything had to be controlled by servants, so many of them lost their lives during the battles. The Dark Star organization has since turned all sorcery into the most dangerous Book of Evil that is capable of many things. That was why the Book of Evil was banned, without exception for anyone, and even the Empress could not use it for her intentions. Iris indicated that she was not interested in the artifacts in question, but Mistress asked her to remember that she would not be able to keep track of everything. She didn't understand how the Empress could know so much about the sorcery that had been lost, and how Cain could have learned it. Her thoughts were interrupted by Serena asking Iris if she was okay, and how her conversation with the Empress went. Their conversation was interrupted by Cain, who informed them that they were completely out of time and needed to quickly pack their things in order to leave. Cain explained that the court's swordsman was being treated, and the Empress had more important things to do, so they needed to leave. Serena and Iris didn't understand where they were going to go now, and Cain replied that it was time for them to visit Churionel. Meanwhile, the last of the assassins returned to the sewers to their master to report the situation. Her commander laughed, realizing that the entire squad had failed their mission, and asked how it felt for her to meet her old friend. Then he threw the assassin 23 hearts and asked her to heal because he expected guests tomorrow. Then number 23 followed her master because he informed her that her revenge was very near. Churionel is a city built on the river to carry out free trade that was created by permission of the Empire. In the city itself, the big merchants were discussing what they should do now, since they had failed to find a goddess with a beautiful face to trade with. They were very worried because they realized that they would face great loss at the goddess festival if they couldn't find the goddess. One of the vendors said they should definitely come up with something, even if they had to introduce a boy in a dress. Other merchants were not willing to be deceived, but realized that if it could all pay off, it would be a profitable solution. Iris, Serena and Cain were floating on the boat and heard everyone just talking about how there was going to be a festival very soon and it was going to be a big celebration. Serena recalled that after everything that had happened, the Empress had summoned her to talk to her, and she was very much dreading this moment. However, the Empress told her the story that Cain disappeared right after she took office. The Empress admitted that in addition to searching for Cain, she was actively searching for an equally talented man of that era. Serena didn't realize who was as talented and similar to Cain in the entire history of the continent and clarified who the Empress had managed to find. The Empress explained that the only person she had managed to find was the ultimate evil and head of the Dark Star. So she ordered Serena to go with him, and if he was plotting with the head of the Dark Star to do something against the Empire, to take his life. Remembering their conversation, Serena thought about the fact that even if the speculation was true, would she be able to take Cain's life with her own sword? Her thoughts were interrupted by Iris, who decided to ask Serena what the festival was all about. Serena smiled and replied that the Goddess Festival is held the first month of every year in this wonderful city of commerce on the river. Iris began to worry because if there was a Goddess Festival, there would most likely be priests as well. Serena smiled and reported that there were no temples in the area, so there was simply no cause for concern. Iris agreed with her because Churiona merchants really wouldn't waste money and donate to temples. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the water, and when they looked back, they realized that something had happened because Cain had jumped out of the boat they were in. Not realizing what was happening, Serena immediately rushed into the water and started looking for Cain to save him. Iris didn't understand exactly what had happened either, or why Cain had suddenly just gone underwater. Finding Cain, Serena pulled him out of the water and put him in the canoe, checking his vitals. Realizing he wasn't breathing, Serena decided to perform CPR to bring him to consciousness. Coughing and spitting out the excess water, Cain regained consciousness and Iris was glad he was okay. Serena immediately asked the attendant where the alchemist or priest could be found and asked him to take them there immediately. Iris didn't understand what was going on, and Serena replied that he had fallen into the water because he had passed out. After a little while, Serena opened the door holding Cain on her back and told her to get a priest immediately. The shopkeeper said that the two priests had gone out not too long ago, and he didn't know where exactly they had gone. Serena was filled with anger and asked to be told what they were wearing, and the employee explained to her what the priests he had seen looked like. Then she asked Iris to wait for her here and immediately ran outside to find the priest. Serena realized that it was the priest she needed because Cain was an accomplished alchemist himself and couldn't deal with the disease. Serena's thoughts were interrupted by a man who was running very fast and jumped towards the boxes of bricks with all his speed. Taking the boxes off the man, she wondered if he had hurt himself badly, but saw a bracelet that was the same as Cain's. The boy smiled sweetly and replied that he was fine, just had a bit of a headache now from being bruised so badly. Serena realized that if she wasn't mistaken about the bracelet, the young man belonged to the Blessing of the Night and was a priest. Chris introduced himself and replied that they always thank the world born of darkness for its gifts and offerings. He explained that he was only studying to become a priest of the Dark Order, but was a very successful student. Suddenly, Chris started shaking with fear and begging to be spared and not tell anyone anything, and he's willing to change his faith and do anything. Serena was beginning to realize why Chris was acting so strange, and it probably had something to do with their religion being joined with the devil. However, their conversation was interrupted by a crowd of merchants who, seeing Chris, were ready to head in his direction because they wanted to catch him. Chris, at the sight of the merchant, started to run away, and Serena didn't want to miss him since she had just found him and ran after him. Chris was very worried about not realizing if their journey was safe, and Serena decided to clarify why the merchants had decided to seek him out and were so unkind. Chris replied that he didn't understand because he was eating a kebab. But then suddenly the traders ran after him and he lost the man he was walking with. Hugging Serena, Chris asked her not to leave him and to help him find his teacher, because he wouldn't be able to cope in this place without him. Serena realized she didn't have time for this, but she couldn't say no, so she agreed to help Chris. Chris admitted that he had lost his hearing due to taking some medication, but had gained strength and power. Serena didn't understand how he could talk to her then, and Chris admitted that the teacher had taught him to read lips. She realized that if Chris could read lips so quickly and well, they could talk quite calmly to each other. Chris admired his teacher because he taught him a lot, and despite his strictness, even praised him sometimes. Serena replied that most likely Chris's teacher should be just happy with such abilities of his outstanding student. Chris looked very happy, especially because Serena said that teachers scold their students because they care about them so much. Serena felt a little jealous of Chris because she couldn't even tell him the name of her teacher, which was her grandfather. After all, Serena's grandfather was an apostle of the Dark Order sword, was the first owner of the sword, and was very sorry for the way the knights disintegrated. She recalled how her grandfather and the elders in the family had tried to rebuild a secret organization of knights, but it had all fallen apart without the support of the Empire. Serena recalled that when her grandfather was Spirdo, the head of the Dark Order of the Star, came to him and offered his help. She thought about the fact that probably the head of Dark Star was able to gain immortality thanks to the Devil Book and kept creating plans. For a moment, Serena decided to put all thoughts aside and focus on healing Cain, so she asked Chris to hurry up. Meanwhile, Iris was tending to Cain and couldn't believe that even an alchemist wouldn't be able to help and heal him. Iris hoped Serena would bring help very soon and thought about that and forgot how people could suffer and be in pain. She remembered the words of the demon Reventus, who said that she grew and matured much slower than all other demons. Iris looked at Cain and thought about how much longer they could be together. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door, and Iris ran to the door, hoping that Serena could find and bring the priest. Opening the door, she saw a girl who said that Lady Leville had left a note to help treat a patient, so she had come.